Chapter 255. Samir then gave a few more orders. She would bring Seneca's coffin back to the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, and the various legions would shift their focus to ensure the stability of the newly conquered city. The main generals would also follow Seneca's coffin back to Nineveh. After the state funeral, Lohud and Faust would rush to the city of Enrol. After that, Samir concluded her first court session and retreated to the back of the palace. Lohud stood in place for a long time without saying a word. When Prime Minister Alpha walked past him, he patted his shoulder and said, "Lord Lohud, you are the new hope of the empire. You are truly a master of both the pen and the sword. The whole nation is looking forward to your new achievements." Faust wanted to see Samir, but the palace servants told him that Her Majesty was tired and sad about the death of Emperor Sinek. She did not want to see anyone in private. Faust had no choice but to silently leave the palace. His residence in the city of Lys was, of course, the most luxurious room in the Enlil shrine, but this supreme mage was not willing to live in the shrine. Even when he passed by the Great Hall, he could not help but cast a magic that concealed his breath, deliberately avoiding the statue on the altar. He tried to comfort himself in his heart. Her Majesty the Empress sent him to Enlil city to let him avoid the divine temple. In Enrol, he could live anywhere he wanted, and no one would dare to restrict him. But in the capital, as the chief high priest of the empire and the sage, he had to live in the main shrine and conduct all kinds of rituals in front of the statue of Enrol every day. When he faced the statue of Enrol, he naturally had a feeling of avoiding it. He even closed his mind so that when he prayed, even the gods could not hear his true thoughts. But on the other hand, Samir had sent him far away from the Saya Plateau. This was a form of alienation, as if Samir did not want to coexist with him in the capital. Although on the surface, Empress Tanuki showed enough respect for this sage imperial tutor and showed complete trust in him when it came to military affairs, it was all business as usual. Their personal relationship had not changed at all. That was the case on the surface, but Faust knew that Samir had been very tolerant of him, even deliberately sheltering him. Because of the assassination of Sinak, Faust, who was in charge of the magic formation at the time, had to bear the main responsibility. Everyone, including the supreme mage Diego Jo, did not blame Faust for using the air elemental armor. Instead, they were grateful to him for temporarily saving Seneca's life. It was also Faust who pleaded with Samir to spare the guards' lives. However, Faust knew what was going on. He did not necessarily need to use the air elemental armor to block that arrow. His more important goal at that time was to create an opportunity for Gilgamesh to assassinate him. Even if others didn't know the inside story, Queen Samir must have known, but she didn't say anything. She didn't even mention it. There were a few who questioned Faust for failing to protect King Sinek, but they were reprimanded and punished by the queen. Faust still couldn't figure out what kind of attitude Samir had towards him. Her Majesty knew that he had betrayed Sinek and deliberately allowed the assassin to get his hands on the secret that was enough to ruin his reputation, but she didn't punish him. She still allowed him to be the high and mighty sage of the nation. This was her kindness to him. However, Samir had sent Faust to Enrol to face a hopeless war that was destined to fail. Was this her punishment for him? On the way back to the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, following Seneca's coffin, Faust's heart was full of contradictions. In fact, Samir did not treat him coldly, nor did she treat him more intimately than before. But now, the situation had changed. Faust's thoughts and feelings had also changed. He felt that he was further away from the love in his heart, and everything he did was to get closer to it. Faust felt as if his soul had split into two parts, and he was talking to himself. He did bear the main responsibility for Seneca's death, but getting rid of this cruel emperor was his original intention. Now that he had succeeded, he should feel gratified. But why did the feeling of dissatisfaction in his heart grow stronger? The Assyrian Empire's strategy of consolidating and shrinking the front lines was formulated by Faust himself. Enrol was to be abandoned in the plan. This was also the strategy that Faust had proposed. Samir had also adopted his decision, so what was wrong with sending him to carry it out? The failure of Enlil city might affect the honor and reputation of the sage imperial preceptor who was at the front lines. Samuel had sent another scapegoat, Lowered, to take the blame for this future crime. This arrangement was enough to make Faust feel grateful. Since he had followed his heart's desire to assassinate Sinuc and reverse the Assyrian Empire's national policy, what was there to be dissatisfied about? But Faust still felt pain. In the dark night, he asked himself, Faust, Faust, you have not lost anything, and you have achieved your original intention. You have gotten rid of the cruel emperor and reversed the fate of the empire. Why are you getting more and more depressed? When a seemingly impossible wish came true, the hidden desires in his heart began to sprout. Things that he had never thought about before, even though he knew it was impossible, began to sprout like hopeless seeds. After returning to the city of Nineveh, before the state funeral of Emperor Sinuc, Faust, who lived in the main shrine of the empire, endured an inexplicable torment in his heart every night. It was as if the brand left by Satan in his soul was burning him. He was thinking about Samir, but the image of Samir seemed to have become abstract and blurry, becoming the shadow of many women. Her charming smile and delicate body were even accompanied by moans and gasps, causing Faust to shudder. On the other hand, he could not stand the existence of the statue of Enlil in the shrine. Although he was not in front of the statue, he knew that the statue was watching everything in the shrine. Samir lived deep in the palace, and Faust had no other opportunity to see her except for routine court discussions. This was normal, because Her Majesty was keeping vigil for Sinuc. At this sensitive time, it was not appropriate for her to make any abnormal movements. This made Faust feel inexplicably anxious. Finally, one night, he quietly left the shrine as if he was escaping from something. He disguised himself and appeared in a luxurious brothel in Nineveh. A 9th-level supreme mage was traveling in disguise, so naturally, there would be no flaws. The girls did not know that this white-haired old man with a face full of wrinkles was the respected sage of the empire. Faust was very rich, so he was very generous. The girls were overjoyed, wishing that they could do everything in their power to serve him as he flew to the top of the clouds. Faust was a 9th-level supreme mage in his 50s, but his body was actually as strong as a young man in his early 20s. His youthful vigor that had never been vented before erupted for the first time. He drank a lot of wine and experienced an unprecedented indulgence in his life. He woke up before dawn. He played with the beautiful naked bodies of the 10 girls in the fragrant pavilion, and placed glittering parangons between their thighs, on their bellies, and in their cleavage. Then, he quietly returned to the shrine. No one found out what the sage had done during the night. The next morning, there was a routine sacrificial ceremony, presided over by Faust. The chief high priest of the empire stood by the altar and chanted sacred hymns, but he was completely absent-minded. He felt that he was being absurd, and that everything that happened last night was just a boring emptiness. But when night fell again, he fell into the entanglement of emptiness again. There seemed to be a voice in his soul saying, Faust, why do you have to do this? So he quietly left the shrine to find his nightlife. Although the respected sage was the most knowledgeable man in the Assyrian Empire, he had little experience in visiting brothels. Once the floodgates of desire were opened, it was difficult to restrain them. He always went to the same brothel, which was large and luxurious. He was always generous, and the girls were naturally beautiful and charming. Such customers were most welcome in the brothel, but there was one thing that Faust went too far with. Perhaps he did not rely on his wealth, or perhaps he did not even realize how generous he was, but simply indulged himself. Almost all the most beautiful girls in the brothel had accompanied him, and during the days of national mourning for Emperor Sinuc, they had spent one passionate night after another. People did not know Faust's identity, only that he was an unattractive little old man, but he spent money in the brothel, and had many beautiful girls accompany him every night. Later on, Faust no longer rotated a different batch of girls every day. At least he had his eye on one of them, and for many days, he had her accompany him every night. This was because the girl's facial features vaguely resembled Samir, but she appeared so delicate, and always had a timid and melancholy look. No matter how much money Faust gave her, this girl could not smile at him from the bottom of her heart like other girls. When he took her, he could even feel the trembling and resistance in her heart, and this aroused Faust's desire even more. She was like a flower that needed his nourishment and care. He played in the brothel like this, and no one knew his identity. Sooner or later, he would stir up trouble. Not long after, Faust stirred up trouble, and the cause of it was this girl. There was a young general in the empire who used to frequent this brothel, and some time ago, he followed the army into battle. During this time, he returned to the capital with the wealth he gained from the battlefield, and often came to find this girl. In the end, for several days, he heard that the girl was accompanying a little old man. A general who had killed countless people on the battlefield would not have a good temper. Finally, one night, he could not help but call the owner of the brothel to discuss with the customer that he was willing to pay a large sum of money to get the girl to accompany him. But the little old man did not even pay attention to him, not giving him any face as a hero of the empire who had killed countless enemies. So, he got drunk and rushed into the room where Faust was. Although it was said that when a warrior faced a mage, a sudden close combat would be more threatening, but it also depended on what kind of warrior faced what kind of mage. Of course, Faust did not bring his staff, and had drunk a little too much. He did not even lift his eyelids from the bed, and with just a gentle wave of his hand, the 6th-level warrior was sent flying through the side wall and injured. This time, the mess was big. A group of soldiers who were on good terms with the general heard the news and came to settle the score with the little old man, but Faust was nowhere to be found. The owner of the brothel also could not tell where the mysterious and rich little old man came from. As a result, a group of meritorious soldiers who had returned triumphantly from the battlefield tore down one of the brothel's fragrant pavilions, smashed many things, and injured several people. Even the capital's garrison guards were alarmed. This happened 2 days before Sihanouk was officially buried in the tombs of the Assyrian emperors. Prime Minister Alpha was deeply enraged, and ordered the troublemakers to be severely punished and investigated. The soldiers who had caused trouble had all been dealt with, but where could they go to find that little old man Mao? According to the description, the little old man looked a bit like the sage imperial teacher, but when someone said this, he quickly slapped his own mouth and repeatedly explained that he did not mean to offend him. Interestingly, Amon had also caused trouble in a courtyard in Montefiore, and used this as a pretext to make a fuss. But Faust was different. When he sobered up, he immediately left. It was impossible for him to reveal his identity and cause a ruckus like Amon. He couldn't even let his name leak out, otherwise it would be one of the biggest scandals in the empire in recent times. The reputation and prestige of the sage imperial preceptor had become his betrayal. Faust never went to the brothel again, nor did he see the girl again. 3 days later, he rushed to the city of Enrol with the Minister of the Interior, Lord Lowered. After arriving in Enrol, Faust did not live in the shrine, but in the temporary palace that Samir had stayed in. Lille City doesn't have any brothels, and this sage imperial tutor also felt that his actions in the past few days were absurd. It was as if he didn't know who he was, and he definitely didn't want to mention it again. But every time night came, he felt his soul become even more desolate. He had been used to praying for so many years, but now he did not know who to pray to. He did not want to talk about his experience, but he could not help but think about it. When the girl saw him wave his hand and hit the general who had barged in, her expression was not one of admiration or worship, but one of unconcealable fear. Even her soft body became stiff. He saw his own appearance in the mirror, his face full of wrinkles, and thought of how the general who had barged in was so young and handsome. Perhaps the girl's heart really liked that kind of man. He inexplicably began to pray again, but it was not to call on the gods. O Suxian, it was you who said, "My desire is the ruler, and the power you guide is its servant." Please tell me, Samir knew my feelings, but still stayed away from me. Was it because I was not young and handsome enough? Was it because that kind of appearance could attract a woman? Unexpectedly, he actually heard Sudan's response, "I cannot answer this question, because you cannot decide whether she will fall in love with you or what she is attracted to. But all of this is never without a reason. You can only decide what kind of charm you have. Perhaps you should pray to the god of youth and love, but as far as I know, everything is still up to you. I guide you to a power that can restore your youthful and handsome appearance, and it is not an information jar that can be seen through. This time, it was the real Ammon who was speaking. When Faust returned to Enril, Ammon also returned to the plains of Duk. He heard Faust's prayer to Sudan, and gave an answer in his soul. At the same time, he also guided Faust's origin power, and also pointed out a special kind of transformation magic. This kind of transformation magic couldn't change a person's life, nor could it turn Faust into another race. However, Faust had enough magic power to show a youthful and handsome appearance when he verified the origin of power from the beginning. In fact, this was a kind of magic to assist in the training of body arts, and it could reshape the bloodline, but the prerequisite was that Faust had to pass tests such as the purity of the body, the purity of the bloodline, the breakthrough of the limit, and so on. Ammon left Babylon city 2 months after the death of Hammurabi II. His whereabouts were very secretive, and he blended into the caravan of Nesket and Lee, sitting in a very ordinary carriage, accompanied by Wendy. People only knew that the man and the woman were relatives of Nesket and Lee, and that they were going to follow the caravan to Valang. They did not know that they were Ammonius and the former adoratress of Babylon. Some people were happy, while others were sad. For the great merchant of Uruk, Nesket and Lee, it was really the end of the bitterness and the beginning of the happiness. He had originally set up a business in Marduk city, and cooperated with Madanzo to smuggle military supplies through wandering explorers, including horses, armor, and weapons. At the same time, he also did a business of lending, which was very profitable. So the merchant saw the opportunity and increased his investment, and his business in Marduk city grew bigger and bigger. Not only did it include the smuggling business with Valang, but the newly built Marduk city itself also needed the support of commercial trade. The mayor, Usser, once held a banquet to entertain Nesket, who came to inspect the business, and praised him verbally, promising to find an opportunity to commend his contributions and fight for a noble status for him. But all these beautiful prospects were destroyed by a war. Due to the sudden invasion of the Assyrian Empire from the northeast, the army led by Vanajingzi had to urgently retreat from the west bank of the Euphrates River. Marduk city was broken through by the Hittite army and renamed to Budamia. The mayor of Marduk city also disappeared, and Nesket and Lee suffered heavy losses. The most profitable business was gone, and the title of nobility was even more out of the question. The merchant actually lost a lot of weight. He envied Scio in Montefiore city. Because he made friends with Ammonius during the war, Scio was now not only one of the top merchants in Lower Igut, but also the deputy director of the Department of Property of Montefiore city. He had the title of nobility and was allowed to buy a large piece of land. And his talent in business was no less than that of Scio. Why was he so unlucky? Chapter 256. Of course, this was also Ammon's idea. Before Ammon left Babylon city, he had discussed some matters with Binut. He wanted to restore trade between Babylon city and the kingdom of Babylon. Ammon had obtained a large sum of money in Babylon city, and this money was useless in his hands. He should organize the most urgently needed goods to be transported to Babylon city. Now, if he wanted to open trade with Babylon city, he needed the permission of the Hittite kingdom to pass through Budamia city. This could be discussed between the kingdom of Babylon and the Hittite kingdom. Restoring trade would benefit both sides. Of course, the experienced Nesket was the best candidate to restore trade, and so Nesket and his career soared overnight. He rushed to the capital to thank Binut I, who encouraged him to set an example and restore trade with the Hittite kingdom and the plains of Duk. The relationship between the two countries had now eased, and this was also a policy adjustment made by Binut after he succeeded to the throne. First, he admitted his weak position after the defeat, and then focused on restoring the people's livelihood and economy. Nesket had become the new lordly of the kingdom, and his caravan would naturally be given special care, and there were generally no checks when entering or leaving the border. But Nesket was a merchant, and he was very good at doing things. Whenever his caravan carried goods that might be prohibited, he would give some benefits to the officials and soldiers at the border, and would not use his status to oppress people. The caravan that Aman followed was already the fourth caravan that Nesket had sent to Babylon city. He did not follow the first caravan back to Babylon city because he did not want to attract too much attention. The journey was indeed uneventful. Wendy was like a bird released from its cage, lifting the curtain to look at the outside world. Anything could make her happy. With a smile, Aman told Wendy that if she was good at gardening, she could go to a divine palace called the Garden of Eden to do what she liked. If she preferred to stay in Babylon, Aman would also make arrangements. When Aesop and George saw Aman come back safe and sound, they were naturally very surprised. But when they saw the beautiful Wendy beside Aman, they were very surprised. They had wanted to discuss matters with the god in the palace of Ammonius, but the carriage took a sudden turn and went to the town in the city where the Dushians lived. They temporarily placed Wendy in the small building where Maya had lived, and then went to the backyard of Aman's home to talk to the god. Aman gave a brief account of his experiences during this period of time and handed over a huge sum of wealth to Aesop in a spatial magic tool. Aesop naturally wouldn't use the spatial artifact, so he let George keep it for the time being. He exclaimed, "Oh my God, you're really omnipotent. You've saved Tulingcheng's life. Now we don't lack manpower or material resources to evacuate Leng, but we lack money." George smiled and said, "My Ammonius, the more time I spend with you, the more I admire you from the bottom of my heart. This is really a miracle that no one can imagine. You actually brought the adoratress from the gate of the divine Babylon. Wendy is not here. Let me ask you in private, how are you going to arrange for her? Do you want to tell Murin?" Aman glared at George and replied, "You underestimate a god. Do you think she doesn't know? Wendy is a very capable girl, she won't live here for nothing. As for whether she wants to stay in Tulingcheng or go to the Garden of Eden, you have to ask her. Just now, Aesop said that we don't lack manpower or material resources, but now the scale of Tulingcheng is much larger than before. Lord Aesop is overworking himself. What we really lack are talents to govern the city." Aesop hurriedly added, "It's not that I'm overworking myself, it's what I should do and I'm willing to do. I just wanted to tell you something, two very capable people came to Tulingcheng not long ago. I want to put them in an important position, but their identities are very special, and I was just about to ask for your opinion." Aman asked with great interest, "Who are they to receive such a high evaluation from Lord Aesop?" George replied with a smile, "Ammonius, they're both old acquaintances of yours. One is the former lord of Marduk, Usser, and the other is the former chief quartermaster of the Babylon army, Dikairo. After the city of Marduk was breached by the Hittite army, the two of them fled in the chaos and ended up being prisoners of war among the defeated soldiers of the Uruk Legion. Their identities were well hidden and they were never recognized. Later on, the 1,000 or so Uruk Legion prisoners were sent to Tulingcheng by Princess Cilia and Lord Goliath, and they were recognized by Madanzo. So it's these two. They really are old acquaintances of Aman, and they're both very capable." Dikairo used to be the mayor of Akkad, a small town in the state of Kish in the kingdom of Babylon. During the rescue mission of Princess Sisela, he had accomplished a seemingly impossible task, demonstrating his outstanding organizational skills and political talent. At that time, both Prince Binut and Princess Sisela appreciated him very much, and both wanted to recruit him for their own use. Prince Binut acted even faster, promoting him to the city of Kish. Later on, when Prince Binut gained control of the army, he promoted him to chief quartermaster. As for Usser, he was the leader of the highland giant tribe that kidnapped Princess Sisela. It was indeed not easy for him to organize the highland giants, who were all brawn and no brains, into a coordinated operation. Later on, he built the city of Marduk in the southeast corner of the plains of Duk, which was more than enough to prove his ability to govern a city. However, Usser and Aman still had some history. He had once stopped the Dushians from returning to their hometown under the orders of Marduk. After the city of Marduk was breached by the Hittite army, the two of them fled to the banks of the Babylon River, but before they could cross the river, they were captured by the Hittite army and the Uruk legion that followed. They mixed in with the Uruk legion prisoners of war and became Hittite slaves, but their identities were not exposed. Gilgamesh once asked Goliath and Ammon for help in rescuing the Uruk legion prisoners of war. Later, under the mediation of Goliath and Princess Sisera, these prisoners of war became slaves bestowed by the king of Hittite to the cold Prince Ammon. At the same time, Uruk also paid the Hittite army a nominal sum of money at a very low price, and brought these more than 1,000 people to Uruk. According to Ammon's intention, they should be given freedom and be allowed to decide whether to stay or leave, but Aesop very much hoped that this group of people would stay. The Uruk legion was once the most powerful legion on the continent. These people were prisoners of war from this legion, and if they were incorporated into the Uruk legion and trained a little, they would be able to burst out with powerful combat power. So Aesop provided very generous conditions. First, he conveyed the oracle of Ammonius, announcing that they had regained their freedom, and promised that as long as they were willing to stay and swear loyalty to the city of Salem, they would be given fertile land, farm tools, food seeds, and building materials. A few hundred of them chose to return to the city of Uruk, while the other half stayed. Among the people who stayed, Madanzo occasionally found Usser and Tich. Usser did not return to Babylon because he did not dare to go back. Binut, who first grasped the power of the kingdom and later ascended the throne, was modest but tough, and some of his policies were quite harsh and not negotiable. He once issued an order that if the people fled in the face of an enemy attack, they would not be held accountable, but if the city lords and garrison generals fled without permission, they would be executed and all their property confiscated. Even Binut's trusted aides could not be pardoned. Of the 6 cities that were captured by the Assyrian army, 1 city lord died in battle, 2 surrendered and were captured, and the other 3 fled before the Assyrian army arrived. As a result, they were all executed by Prince Binut in front of everyone, and then he issued the following order. Usser was also a city lord who had escaped. Although it was because the city was breached, he did not receive Prince Binut's order to retreat. There was a reason for it, and he had tried his best, but he still could not escape punishment. Moreover, Princess Sisera had left, and he had lost his backer in the political world of the kingdom, so he naturally did not want to return to Babylon. As for Tich, he happened to be in the city of Marduk at that time, and he was ordered to temporarily help Usser defend the city. Although he was also responsible, Binut I may not punish him severely, but he himself did not want to go back. The former mayor had a kind of aristocratic pride in his bones. Being defeated and captured was a kind of humiliation for him, and it was the freedom that the city of Selen gave him. According to aristocratic etiquette, he should swear allegiance to the city of Selen, so he chose to stay. After hearing this, Ammon smiled and said, Aesop, in fact, either one of these 2 people has the ability to govern a city. Congratulations on having 2 capable assistants, they are fully capable of serving as the director of the city, and you will also be able to relax a lot. Now that Ammon had become a god, he rarely interfered with the mundane affairs of the human world. After attaining the realm of transcendence and immortality, his perspective and mentality had also become detached. After a brief chat, he let Aesop deal with it himself. When Wendy asked Ammon where she wanted to go, she did not hesitate to answer the Garden of Eden. The girl's idea was very interesting to Ammon. She hoped to return to the human world in the gate of the divine god, but after seeing the real god Ammon, and hearing that there was a divine palace in the human world, she naturally wanted to go to the Garden of Eden. Ammon asked George to send Wendy to the Garden of Eden first, and told the disciples to wait in the Garden of Eden. He would arrive in a few days, and once again disappeared in front of the mortals. Of course, Ammon wanted to go back to the Garden of Eden, but he did not want to walk with George and Wendy, which could easily expose his whereabouts. And Enlil must be paying attention to his whereabouts at all times, so it was not the time to lure the fish to the bait. And it was during this time that Faust came to Enlil again, heard Sudan's voice, and gave him the latest guidance of power. Wendy entered the Garden of Eden for the first time, and the amazement in her heart was almost indescribable. She never dreamed that there was such a beautiful, peaceful, and magical world in the world. In her mind, this was the kingdom of heaven where the gods lived. Since ancient times, those who could enter the divine palace of the gods in the human world were the oracles guided by the gods. Generally, they could only enter the divine palace when they were about to master the 8th level of the power of origin and pass the test of losing power. Without exception, they were all great achievers in the human world. As for the disciples, some of them had entered the Garden of Eden before reaching this realm, and they were considered exceptions. Of course, people like Wendy who could enter the divine palace without any training were the exceptions among the exceptions. In the Garden of Eden, the disciples of Ammon were also quite welcoming and took care of Wendy, an ordinary girl in the human world, because she was Ammonius woman. Whether it was or not, Ammon had lived with her in the gate of God for so long, and he had abducted the former adoratress of Baron from Marduk's place, and ordered George to personally send her to the Garden of Eden. Didn't he have to go? He couldn't deny it even if he wanted to. The disciples also pondered in their hearts, Murin probably wouldn't be happy to see Ammon do this, but this was something for the gods themselves to worry about, and the disciples couldn't interfere. And for Wendy, the days spent in the Garden of Eden were the happiest of her life. The people here were so beautiful, handsome, happy, and kind, and they all called themselves angels. And there was a big difference between them and mortals, they all had wings. Ammon hadn't been back for half a year, so why did the disciples all have wings, and even call themselves angels? The story had to start with Michael and Seagull. Seagull's injuries had healed under Cecilia's careful treatment, and he returned to the Garden of Eden. He had once transformed into a giant bird on the battlefield, the scene was very dazzling, and he had achieved unexpected results. Ammon had taught Faust a form of transformation magic to reconstruct the bloodline, and his disciples naturally knew it too. Later, Seagull didn't want to always transform into a giant bird, so he cultivated a pair of wings that could appear at any time, and could display all kinds of magical powers, looking very impressive. These wings were originally the wings of a seagull, with some gray spots at the tips. Once he left the Garden of Eden and flew to the city of Meso to see Cecilia, and showed this pair of wings, but Cecilia said that pure white looked better. As a result, when he returned to the Garden of Eden, the wings had become very beautiful pure white, like a luxurious cloak behind him. Link felt that Seagull's appearance was very cool, even cooler than the always cool Madanzo, so he also cultivated such wings. The rest of the disciples also felt that this kind of cultivation was very interesting, so everyone cultivated pure white wings. Madanzo passed the test of endless arising and ceasing cycle and became a 9th-level divine emissary, and Gabriel passed this test almost at the same time as him. In fact, Gabriel had already vaguely comprehended this state of mind after the fall of Saintess Maria, and after the Battle of Talang in Enril City, he really comprehended this state of mind. She also went to the Garden of Eden to cultivate and became a 9th-level divine emissary. According to the customs of the various divine clans in the continent, 9th-level divine emissaries were already called gods on earth, but in their hearts, Ammon was the only god who guided their faith. So the disciples discussed one thing together: if one of them achieved the realm of eternal life in the future, how should they call themselves? As a result, everyone learned from the current practice of the Ennead and unanimously decided that no matter what realm they reached, they would call themselves angels. Later, some people saw the pure white wings of the angels and thought they were the wings of white pigeons, but in fact, they were the wings of seagulls. As the leader of Ammon's disciples, Madanzo's wings were different, and when he spread his wings, he did not look like a big white pigeon, but more like a blazing firebird. Madanzo had always liked to have a cool image, and even when he became a 9th-level divine emissary, this temper did not change. He had seen the god of fire of the Anunnaki divine clan and felt that the appearance of that flame was very arrogant, and had long vowed that one day he would overshadow the limelight of the god of fire. He also told Link and the others that he was the captain of Ammonius' guards and had led 36 generals of the guards, and now that he had become a 9th-level divine emissary, when he cultivated 36 fire wings, it would represent the perfection of his magic power and realm, and he would usher in the test of transcending eternal life. And Link teased him, saying that when the time came, he would be like a chicken on fire. Just half a month after Wendy arrived in the Garden of Eden, Ammonius finally met the disciples again. he didn't fly to this place. Instead, like a wandering hunter, he crossed the Euphrates Valley on foot. Even the gods couldn't detect his presence. But one goddess seemed to have a premonition, and as soon as Aman stepped into the Garden of Eden, before he could say a few words to the disciples, Murin arrived with the elf-maid Shubra. The disciples hurried to welcome the goddess of youth and love, while Aman stepped forward and gave the goddess a gentle and warm hug, saying softly, "Yun Nam Na, I finally see you again." In front of the disciples, Murin gave Aman face, holding his arm with a coquettish and reserved smile, and greeted the divine emissaries in the Garden of Eden. After letting go of Aman's hand, she took Wendy's hand and exclaimed, "You are that girl, right? The adoratress of Baron who was brought out of the divine gate by Aman." In front of another god, Wendy was still a little timid. But the legendary goddess of youth and love had always been worshipped by the women on the continent, and now she was standing in front of her, looking so familiar. Wendy felt like she was dreaming. She raised her head and replied, "I am no longer the adoratress of Baron, I am Wendy." "Thank you, Aman, and thank you, my goddess." Murin took Wendy's hand and asked her for a long time. In front of the goddess, the innocent girl answered all her questions respectfully. Then Murin asked Shubra to talk to Wendy, introducing her to the divine palace of Murin, which was also what Aman called Yun Namna's Rose Garden. The goddess claimed that she had something important to discuss with Aman, and called Aman alone to the belly of the mountain where he usually cultivated. The goddess was, after all, a goddess. It was obvious that she was not happy that Aman brought Wendy back, and there was nothing to hide between the gods. But she did not pull Aman's ear and shout like the women in the mortal world, "You devil! I was worried about you at home, but you were fooling around outside." Instead, she sat there and looked at Aman, and said in a faint tone, "I heard that you were hurt by the god of flame and the god of ash. Enril must have seen through you. He will definitely find a chance to kill you, and you still have the leisure to do so." Chapter 257. 238, Imperial Killer Yun Nam Na raised her eyebrows slightly and glared at Aman. "I'm not unhappy, but can you expect me to be happier? I don't want to listen to other people's stories, tell me what happened in person." Aman imprinted a piece of information into Yun Nam Na's soul, telling her everything he had experienced during this period of time without any reservation. Yun Nam Na looked at Aman with a studying gaze for a while, and suddenly covered her mouth and laughed. "You're really something, coming back after taking a lot of advantage of Marduk. But what you are going to do is very dangerous, you must be careful and plan carefully, as for that girl Wendy." At this point, she stopped talking. Aman had to ask, "What's wrong with Wendy, don't you want to see her?" "I have explained the cause and effect clearly, and Marduk asked me to make another request, but I still chose to take her away. Even when I first saw her, even if I knew you would be unhappy now, I would still make the same choice." Yun Nam Na was not only the goddess of youth and love in the Anunnaki divine clan, but also the goddess of war. She suddenly said to Aman, "Why are you sitting so far away? Can't you sit a little closer?" Aman's figure disappeared from the opposite seat and appeared beside Murin. The goddess of war stretched out a hand and used her divine power to pinch Aman, while Aman looked at her with a nonchalant smile. Murin added, "This girl is very good, even I sympathize with her, if someone else takes her out of the divine gate, I would be very happy. Maybe I would take her away when I see her. If she wasn't so pure and kind, why would I hold her hand and talk so much? I want to discuss something with you. Would you be willing to borrow someone from the Garden of Eden to do gardening in my rose garden?" Aman laughed. "You want to take Wendy to the rose garden? As long as she is willing, it's fine, but why do you have this idea? Isn't Shubra taking care of the rose garden? She's much better than Wendy." Murin pinched him again and snorted, "You still have the nerve to talk about Shubra? Your disciples are the same as you. You abducted the saintess of Baron, and your disciple, Moses, abducted my elven maidservant, Shubra." Aman frowned and said, "It can't be, how can there be such a thing? As far as I know, Shubra has always been in your rose garden, not in the Garden of Eden." Yun Namna pouted and said, the person was not abducted, but the heart was. You haven't been around during this time, so of course you don't know the situation. Shubra has asked me several times, hoping that she can come to the Garden of Eden to help build the garden. I knew what she was thinking, so I brought her along this time. Aman smiled again. That's a good thing. Thank you for helping me. When has my Yun Namna ever suffered a loss? Sending a Shubra means taking away a Wendy, as long as she is willing. Yun Namna looked at him with a faint smile and said, as the goddess of youth and love, do you think I can't persuade a girl? Wendy will be happy to go with me, and I will personally guide her and train her to be the oracle of the rose garden. If she is not so lucky, then a mortal can live a short life of a few decades in happiness. This should satisfy you, right? Aman reached out and pulled her into his arms, bowed his head and said, thank you, my goddess. Yun Namna suddenly burst into laughter in front of his chest and said, my Ammonius, the famous Ammonius, do you know you have a new nickname? Aman was stunned and asked in reply, what nickname? At the same time, he muttered in his heart, could it be a nickname like Casanova, or something like that? Yun Namna poked Aman's chest with her finger and said, the emperor killer of the world. This nickname had indeed just spread on the mainland. The former king of Babylon, Hammurabi II, had seen Ammonius in the palace and died the next morning. Somehow, this matter had spread to the people and many people had heard of it. It could be said that Aman had sent away a total of several emperors. He once captured the former king of Hittite, Lucier, but Lucier died shortly after returning to the capital. He also personally drove the carriage of the pharaohs of Igut, Lazith II, and led the army back to Montefiore. And the pharaoh let Aman follow him directly to his territory, but after returning to Thebes, he suddenly died. As for the emperor of Assur, there was no need to mention. According to the announcement of the Assur Empire, this invincible emperor died of serious injuries in a battle with Ammonius. All the emperors of the 4 countries on the continent soon passed away after seeing Aman. In fact, none of them were killed by Aman, but it was too much of a coincidence to link these events together. So Ammonius gained the title of Emperor Killer of the human world. After this title spread, it was estimated that when the emperors of the various countries heard the name of Ammonius, they would be scared to death, lest this god would come to them. Ammonius and Murin stayed in the palace in the belly of the mountain for a few days and nights. No one knew what they were discussing, but the disciples did not dare to disturb them. After a few days, the 2 of them came out. Murin asked Wendy with a smile if she would like to follow her to the rose garden. No one knew what she said to the girl, but Wendy happily agreed. So Murin left the Garden of Eden with Wendy and returned to her own palace, but left Shubra in the Garden of Eden. After leaving the Euphrates Valley, Murin appeared high in the sky. A white cloud carried her and Wendy forward. Wendy's eyes widened as she looked at the rivers and mountains under her feet. She was actually flying in the clouds with a god. She almost forgot to close her mouth along the way. If there were divine emissaries spying in the dark, they would have seen this scene clearly, and would have been able to see Wendy beside Murin. Murin was still talking to Wendy in a low voice on the clouds. A few days ago, Shubra had introduced the situation in the rose garden in detail to Wendy, and Murin told Wendy what she was going to do in the rose garden. She also said that Aman often went there, and that such a palace was a good place for gods to recuperate on earth. After Aman finished dealing with the matters in Salem on earth, it would not be long before he came to the rose garden. At that time, she hoped that Wendy would be able to cultivate the most beautiful flowers in the world to welcome Aman. The goddess took Wendy and talked all the way, looking at the scenery from the clouds, and floated into the palace of the rose garden. Even if they did not show themselves, flying in the clouds for so long would definitely be noticed by the gods. Aman also left the Garden of Eden soon after, disappearing into the mountains without a trace. After another period of time, a man dressed as a wandering hunter came out of the jungle of the Euphrates Valley, leaning on a tree-like cane, and began to climb the steep Assyrian plateau, disappearing into the rocky cliffs. This man was Ammonius, and he really kept his promise and rushed to the palace of Murin, but he did not want to be discovered flying in the sky. When he reached the top of the desolate plateau, he could no longer cover himself as a wandering hunter, because no hunter would run to such a place to hunt. So Aman used his stealth magic again and walked across the peaks of the lofty plateau. The snow that never melted all year round did not leave his footprints, nor did the glaciers that stretched across the peaks reflect his figure. Climbing the plateau to the palace of Murin, there were still 3,000 miles to go, and Aman had just walked a short distance when he suddenly sensed a faint, almost imperceptible wave of detection magic sweeping over. He immediately stopped and turned away, his figure like a wisp of smoke rushing into a deep valley. Although his reaction was quick, it was too late. Enril had been waiting for him for a long time, and he had sent his emissaries who were best at stealth and detection to guard the area leading to the palace of Murin. This was the place where Aman was most likely to appear. These emissaries were not necessarily good at fighting, and if Aman noticed that his whereabouts were exposed and wanted to escape, they might not be able to catch up, but they could inform Enril at once. Not only that, but Enril also sent emissaries to watch the vicinity of the palace of Murin. If Murin made a move, this god would immediately be informed. His purpose was to make it too late for Murin to save Aman, and at the same time, to give Aman no chance to send out a distress signal. Enril waited for more than half a year, and today he finally succeeded. As Aman was walking in the mountains and wastelands, he suddenly sensed a faint wave of detection magic sweeping over a large area indiscriminately, and realized that he might have been discovered. His reaction was very fast, and he immediately turned into a wisp of green smoke, turned around, and flew away, falling into a deep valley and quietly hiding. If the target of the other party's detection was him, they might not have found his exact location, so they might be able to avoid the search. But Aman immediately realized that he had not escaped, and the other party had found his exact location. Because in the distant horizon, thick smoke and flames were flying towards him, one on the left and one on the right, and their target was the deep valley where he was hiding. It was the god of flames, Kibir, and the god of ashes, Nugus, who he had fought before. Aman did not intend to meet the two divine emissaries face to face, and as soon as he saw them coming from the horizon, he decisively decided not to hide anymore, turning into a golden light and flying out of the deep valley towards the southern part of the Saya Plateau. He wanted to escape back to the plains of Duk as soon as possible, and his speed was obviously much faster than the god of flames and the god of ashes, so it was impossible for the two divine emissaries to catch up. The golden light that Aman had turned into was almost close to the ground, flying at low altitude like a bolt of lightning, and soon left the god of flames and the god of ashes behind, but Aman did not slow down in the slightest. The mountains gradually lowered, and they were almost at the edge of the Saya Plateau. Another huge mountain range appeared in the distance, the last barrier through the Saya Plateau to the plains of Duk. The mountains were high and rugged, and lush jungles grew halfway up the mountains, and the cliffs and precipices were covered with cracks and caves of various sizes. Aman no longer continued to fly close to the ground, and the golden light refracted and shot straight into the sky. He could sense that the divine emissaries chasing after him had been left behind by 1,000 miles, and the detection magic that had been locking onto him had also disappeared. His next step was to step directly into the eternal void of life and death. However, at this moment, he suddenly heard a cold shout in his soul, "Aman! Do you still want to escape?" With this shout, the heavenly god Enril appeared high in the sky with a long whip in his hand, and a powerful pressure spread out, firmly locking onto Aman's figure. After receiving the news, Enril did not come from afar to track Aman, but directly appeared high in the sky to block his way. Behind Aman, there was the god of flames and the god of ashes chasing after him, and in front of him was a tall mountain range, which was turning into a golden light refracting into the sky. The gods were not so long-winded in their attacks, and with that shout, Enril had already lashed out with his whip. Within the range of the divine power of the gods, there seemed to be no distance or hindrance. With a wave of his whip, Aman's figure had already been locked onto by a powerful pressure. If it had been an ordinary person, they would have been scared out of their wits at this moment. But if Enril wanted to kill another god, he would have to hit him directly. The shepherd's long whip unfolded in the sky, but it did not make a sound. At the same time, all the sounds in the world disappeared, and the mountains on the plateau and the clouds in the sky seemed to tremble silently. The long whip was like a huge question, chasing after Aman in search of an answer. Aman, who had experienced hundreds of battles, had experienced countless life and death dangers, but there had never been a more hair-raising experience than this one. His reaction could not be any faster, and he abruptly stopped in midair. The golden light that enveloped his body instantly turned into a golden armor. He pulled out the eye of ceiling and swung it upwards, as if annihilating all the power in mid-air, forming a vacuum that could swallow everything. As he swung his sword, Aman turned around and dove down, rushing head first into the cliff of the huge mountain range in front of him. It was a cliff thousands of feet high halfway up the mountain, and the height was near the snowline. Due to years of glaciers covering and melting, the erosion marks formed had left the huge cliff riddled with cracks, and the rock layers were very severely weathered. The cave structure in the mountain was quite complex, and it was a very suitable place for hiding. If Aman hid quietly in the depths of the mountain before Enrol arrived and locked onto him, it would be difficult for even a god to find him unless the entire cliff was blown down. But now that Enrol had his eyes on him, it would be difficult for him to escape even if he did so, and he was obviously just trying to fight for that slim chance of survival while escaping. Looking at Aman's momentum, he wanted to crash into the mountain, but of course he did not want to kill himself, but wanted to rely on the strong body of a god to drill into the depths of the mountain like a drill. With such a majestic mountain range, it was absolutely impossible for him to escape to the plains of Duk under Enrol's pursuit, but he could rely on the mountain to defend and counterattack, trying to hold on until reinforcements arrived. Murin might come to save him, and this was Aman's only choice at the moment. Aman's figure flew towards the cliff in front of him, and Enrol's whip struck the vacuum that annihilated everything behind him. The long whip coiled into a spiral shape, and with a huge force, it instantly straightened and bounced off, and under the clear sky, a thunderous roar came from the plateau, shattering the vacuum created by Aman. Then Enrol's figure teleported from high in the air to the tip of the long whip, and the tip of the whip strangely turned into a whip shaft that appeared in his hand, and he swung it forward again with all his might. This long whip did not draw a trajectory in the air, and what Enrol swung out was a pervasive force, and his figure followed this force straight towards Aman. Even if Aman had the magical eye of sealing, he would not be able to annihilate it, let alone cut open a spatial rift to escape to another place, and the powerful aura that pervaded the air was almost unparalleled. Enrol did not seem to move at all, but time and space seemed to have become distorted, and the huge cliff seemed to be rushing towards him. No matter how Aman's figure flew, it was getting closer and closer. The whip seemed to be hovering in place, but Aman seemed to be flying forward and retreating, and was about to be firmly entangled by the whip. This was the magic of Enrol as the creator. Although the means did not seem to be different from the changes of the world's top divine arts, the way it was used and the powerful force was not something that Aman could resist. Since he had already made his move, it was impossible to let Aman leave alive. Even if Murin, who was far away in the divine palace of Murin, wanted to save Aman, it was simply too late. The whip was just a little bit away from wrapping around Aman, and Enrol's motionless figure was already standing in front of the cliff, while Aman slammed into the mountain fiercely. A piece of rubble and dust flew everywhere, and the long whip straightened and shot into the mountain rocks, and in the next moment, it would pierce through Aman. At this moment, Enrol's expression changed. He was keenly aware that at the moment when Aman crashed into the cliff, the falling rubble was accompanied by an unusual burst of divine power. This was not a divine art that Aman himself had performed, and its power was simply insignificant in the eyes of a god like Enrol, but the range was extremely wide, forming a shock wave that instantly spread throughout the entire cliff. The premonition of a god was beyond the imagination of mortals. The long whip in Enrol's hand did not continue to chase after Aman, and in an instant, it turned from 1 to 9. Some were flames, some were thick smoke, some were a storm, some were like a spatial boundary, and some were the condensation of various elemental forces. They spread out in all directions like a ponytail, not only to block all possible attacks in the air, but also to form a spiral barrier that tightly wrapped around his body. This god's reaction was too fast, because the majestic peak let out a terrifying roar, and suddenly collapsed towards him. There was actually a trap here, even Enrol did not notice it just now. This trap was not set by Amon. This area had long been monitored by Enrol's oracles, and he had no time or opportunity to set any trap against Enrol. In fact, this trap was set against Amon, 4 years ago, when Murin's ex-husband, Dums, and Enrol's dark wolf god, Moonlit Knight, attempted to capture Amon. Chapter 258. When Amon Shangle became a god, Dums thought that he could not withstand a single blow and wanted to capture him directly and send him to the underworld to exchange for his sister Peloponnes. But Bright Moon Knight had suffered a loss from Amon and knew how powerful he was. She reminded Dums to make a backup plan. If he was no match, he would deliberately escape and lead Amon here. There was a very clever trap laid between the cliffs of this huge mountain range. The core of this trap was only a small magic circle. If it was not touched, there was almost no abnormality. It required a very powerful magic to detonate in an instant, and then the entire mountain wall would collapse. This magic circle also had another function, which was to instantly connect the power generated by the collapsing mountain wall into one. Even a god who had transcended eternal life would probably end up badly if he was caught off guard. After Amon captured Bright Moon Knight alive, he released the seriously injured Bright Moon Knight and took Dums to the underworld to exchange for Peloponnes. But this trap was still there, untouched, as if it had been forgotten. Bright Moon Knight, who made the trap, did not expect that one day Amon would use it against Enrol. The landslide itself could not hurt a god like Enrol, who had the achievement of the creator. Even if a mountain collapsed and buried him, Enrol could turn into a green smoke and come out unscathed. But Bright Moon Knight set up this trap in order to deal with a powerful existence like a god. Its main function was not to use the falling rocks to hurt people, but to connect the power of the landslide into a powerful energy shock, binding and attacking the opponent who fell into the trap. Enrol saw the opportunity very quickly. The whip shadow had already whipped the collapsed mountain wall into powder, forming an independent moving space. But the powerful impact of the condensed force actually forcibly collapsed this divine space. The shock wave that could almost smash everything into powder directly hit the whip that was wrapped around Enlil's body in a spiral shape, and even the sky seemed to tremble with an echo. Enrol fell into the trap, but where was Amon? When the cliff collapsed, where was the safest place? Of course, in the half of the mountain that had not collapsed. It was like hiding under a roof when it was raining. Amon held the eye of ceiling in his hand and turned it into a sharp drill, drilling directly into the depths of the mountain. After the landslide, his figure appeared again in the newly formed precipice, and he swung his sword towards the chaotic world where Enrol was. It was still a powerful sealing force. Amon was afraid that the trap set by Bright Moon Knight was not effective enough, so he added more force and compressed all the energy shock of the landslide together and blasted it towards Enrol. When Amon swung his sword, the countless falling boulders and the huge mountain stopped in the air for a moment, as if the power of the collapse had been sucked out and shifted, and then continued to collapse. Amon only swung his sword once, but this time he used his strongest power, and then his figure turned into a golden light shooting straight towards the sky, not even looking at Enrol who had fallen into the trap. A gray vortex appeared in the sky, and black lightning struck out from the vortex, hitting Amon's body in a way that could not be blocked or avoided. Amon's figure was wrapped in a faint golden light, and he staggered into the eternal void, disappearing from the human world. As soon as Amon escaped, there was a loud crack, and countless whip shadows lashed out from the smoke and dust, forcibly breaking the trap and the sealing force that Amon had applied. The mountain wall not far away was hit by this energy, and a large part of it collapsed. Countless boulders flew in all directions, and Enrol's figure was revealed again. He looked very miserable, his hair disheveled, and his leather robe was torn in several places. The long whip had been destroyed, and the long whip had been broken into countless pieces and scattered along with the rubble at the foot of the mountain. There was only a bare whip in his hand. Enrol was indeed astonishingly powerful. He destroyed this magical weapon that had been refined into one with his body, and forcibly broke through the restraints of the trap and escaped. However, as soon as his figure appeared, and the dust that pervaded the plateau had not yet dispersed, suddenly an aura more terrifying than the landslide firmly locked onto him. At this moment, Enrol's feeling was much more horrifying than when Amon suddenly encountered him. At this moment, he was at his weakest, and the strength of the person who came was much stronger than him. It was his archenemy, Marduk. Marduk's burly and muscular figure was already standing high in the sky, and he said coldly, "Enrol, to think that you would have such a day." When he spoke, he did not give Enrol the slightest chance to breathe, and he waved a long sword in his hand and fiercely chopped down, accompanied by the omnipresent roar of power in all directions. The sword in Marduk's hand was only slightly more than 4 feet long, and the shining blade had snow-like patterns on it. The color was actually dark and snow-white, and the sharp blade also had subtle wave-like patterns that could not be seen with the naked eye. The sword slashed down from the sky and turned into a ray of light that was hundreds of feet long, and the crisscrossing light and darkness brought with it an extremely violent shock, cutting the space into countless fragments, and the buzzing sound even shattered the falling gravel in the distance into flying mist. Faust was presiding over a ceremony in the shrine, representing the giant legion to offer sacrifices to Enrol, calling upon the gods to bestow power upon them, so that this elite legion that had once struck terror into the hearts of their enemies would be filled with fighting spirit again. The main generals of the legion and the governor of the city, Loheward, were all kneeling in front of the statue. Faust held a staff in his hand and recited a hymn. The atmosphere in the hall was mysterious and solemn. In the perception of this peak 9th level supreme mage, the statue of Enrol on the altar was not just a cold stone, but like a living and incredible god standing there. It was precisely because of this that Faust wanted to avoid such occasions. However, with his identity, he had no choice but to be around all day long, presiding over these ceremonies under the gaze of the god. There was a kind of anxiety in his heart that ordinary people could not understand. However, an abnormal situation occurred today. Faust, who was reciting the hymn, heard a strange sound in his soul, as if something had shattered, and the source of the sound was the majestic statue of Enrol on the altar. The statue was still the statue of Enrol, and there seemed to be no change to the naked eye. However, the invisible perception attached to its body had shattered at this moment, as if a living life had instantly turned into a cold, human-shaped boulder. Faust's prayer was actually interrupted at this moment. This was a situation that had never happened before. If it was an ordinary priest who had made such a mistake, he would definitely have been reprimanded and punished. But of course, the crowd did not dare to reprimand or question the sage imperial advisor. They also felt that something was wrong, but could not pinpoint what was wrong. One by one, they quietly raised their gazes. Some looked at Faust with puzzled eyes, while others looked at the statue in the center of the hall with puzzled and perplexed eyes. Faust's face was pale as if he was sick, and flushed as if he was drunk. When he came back to his senses, he immediately returned to his normal demeanor. He lightly coughed twice, as if reminding everyone to maintain etiquette. With a solemn tone, he continued to recite the hymn to the god. That deep and extremely infectious voice once again reverberated in the hall, and the ceremony continued. The god of flames, Kibir, and the god of ashes, Nugus, had been left hundreds of miles behind by Amon, but they were still in hot pursuit along the distant mountains. Suddenly, they heard an earth-shattering sound coming from the horizon. Even from so far away, they could feel the terrifying aura. The distant whistling seemed to pierce directly into their souls. It was the power of Marduk's demonic blade. Although it was not aimed at them, the aura still made them tremble. The thick smoke and flames paused in the air, and then something in their souls disappeared. It was an imprint of an oath, which had existed in their souls many years ago when they accepted the guidance of Enrol to join the Anunnaki divine clan. As long as Enrol was still alive, they would carry out the various tasks of the divine clan. This was both a kind of restraint and a natural sense of mission in the oath. But at this moment, there was suddenly an indescribable change, as if they had returned to how they were before they joined the divine clan. What happened? Could it be that Enrol had fallen? How could this be possible? In a faraway place, the dark wolf god Mingwei had been quietly healing his injuries on an isolated island with beautiful scenery outside the estuary of the Euphrates River and the Lys River. He had attempted to assassinate Amon twice but failed, and both times he escaped with injuries, not only because Amon had injured him, but also because the excessive use of that violent power had brought great damage to his body. Especially the first time he had not fully recovered, and the second time he had followed Dums to plot against Amon. As a result, he was beaten so badly that he could barely get up, and there was not a single part of his body that was not marked with pain. For a long time, he had lost the strength to continue fighting, and temporarily became a cripple among the divine emissaries. In this case, if he did not wait for his injuries to heal and forcibly use that violent power again, it might leave permanent irrecoverable damage, so he had to find a place far away from the conflict to quietly heal. And Amon had an agreement with him: I can let you go without killing you, and I can even give you a chance to free yourself from your mission. But you have to promise me one thing: when you feel that you have fully recovered, you can come to me for a public duel. Don't do any ambushes or assassinations. Come when you are confident, and in the meantime, you are not allowed to hurt my disciples or the people of Talang. So Bright Moon Knight came to this isolated island far away from the mainland, and spent a few years recuperating and recovering, and now he was just about to recover. On this day, when he was about to leave the island and fly to the continent, there was a sudden sound of something breaking in his soul, and a brand disappeared. This brand came from a soul contract, and he was different from the other divine emissaries under Enril. Not only did he receive the guidance of Enril to obtain the power of origin, but he was also equivalent to Enril's summoned beast. As one of the two main gods of the Anunnaki divine clan, Enril had the achievement of the creator, and his mastery of various human magic had naturally reached the pinnacle. He himself was also a far more brilliant summoning magic master than Sylvia. His guidance to Bright Moon Knight was different from that to the other divine emissaries. He focused on teaching him how to cultivate and control that violent power, so that it merged with the body and mind, like the soul of a beast lurking in the human body. Enril also signed a soul contract with Bright Moon Knight, making him the most dangerous assassin on the continent under his command. This soul contract was the brand that merged with the body and mind, and now that the brand had suddenly disappeared, it could only mean one of three things: either Enril had voluntarily given up the contract, or Bright Moon Knight had become strong enough to break through the shackles of the brand, or the god Enril had fallen. The dark wolf god Bright Moon Knight looked at the coastline in a daze. He naturally sensed that it was the third situation, but how was this possible? Bright Moon Knight seemed to be free, but he felt a sense of loss and trance in his soul. Saya of the Hittite kingdom, High Priest Walter hurried to the backyard of the shrine, to the quiet courtyard where his teacher Goliath lived. For some reason, the usually calm Supreme Mage forgot his proper etiquette and almost trotted all the way into the courtyard. He stopped outside the door and said, "Teacher Goliath, I have something important to tell you." The door opened silently, obviously to let him in by himself. But Goliath did not speak. Warret stepped quickly over the threshold and into the house, but he was stunned. The old man, who was revered by the whole nation, who was like a god in the hearts of the people, was silently kneeling on the ground, looking at an empty wall in the room, his shoulders trembling slightly, and his eyes closed, but tears were streaming down his face. Walter never dreamed that Goliath would cry, and cry so silently and sorrowfully. He did not dare to disturb his teacher, so he silently knelt beside him, waiting for Goliath to stop crying. This is the private reception room outside Goliath's bedroom, and the location is the backyard of the shrine of Enril. According to the convention, for a priest like him, this wall should have reliefs or paintings of the gods. Otherwise, it would be against the rules of shrine architecture. But in Goliath's reception room, there was only an empty wall, nothing on it. In the whole kingdom, only the old man had enough authority to decorate the room in the shrine according to his own will. When the priests of the Hittite kingdom discussed this matter in private, not only did they not dare to accuse Goliath of being disrespectful to the gods, but in public, they would praise this supreme mage who had great virtue. They all said that the glory of the gods and the glory of Goliath had merged into one, and that the old man had reached a state where he did not need to rely on any external form to express himself. Although it could be said so, no other priest dared to imitate Goliath, because they were not Goliath. After a long time, Goliath finally stopped crying, took out a piece of soft white cotton from his sleeve and wiped his cheeks, his expression returning to calmness. He stood up and sat down at the table, saying, "Walter, you don't have to be so alarmed, I already know what happened." The change in the statue of Enlil did not only happen in the shrine of Enlil, but also in all the shrines dedicated to the statue of Enlil on the continent. Since Faust was aware of it, how could Goliath, who was in Saya, not feel it? Walter's eyes were full of confusion. "Teacher, you already know?" "I'm not surprised, but how did this happen?" "It's too shocking." Goliath sighed and replied indifferently, 10 years ago, when the great flood destroyed the town of Duk and almost engulfed Saya, I was wondering if this day would come. But I didn't expect it to come so soon. Since the surviving youth of Duk can become a god, then why can't the god who destroyed Duk fall?" Walter quietly asked through message magic, "Respected teacher, I understand your beliefs very well. Your body shines with the light of divinity. In that great flood, the real god was you, not Enlil. And now why are you crying for the fall of Enlil?" Goliath looked at him and replied, "Do you know why I sent Raphael to the plains of Duk and kept you by my side? You and Raphael are different in origin, and you act more steadily than him, but you are also more confused than him. My tears are like the flood of that year, for my old friend Nietzsche, and also for the fall of the god. Enlil's fate does not make me sad, but the fall of the god makes me mourn. Well, thinking of the days when you followed me, the faith that we guarded with half of our lives, the hope that millions of people guarded, Enlil symbolized all this, and will even continue to symbolize all this. His fall is enough to become the world's deep sorrow, and I am also crying for fate. The suffering that has already erupted in the continent will not stop because of this." The confusion in Walter's eyes deepened. "Respected teacher, from what you mean, you already know why Enlil fell. Did Ammonius cut him down?" Goliath nodded, then shook his head gently and said, "Yes, it was because of Ammon, but not because of Ammon. Ammonius' appearance heralded the fall of Enlil. But I know very well that Ammonius is not that powerful, at least not yet. The fall of Enlil is, in a sense, the same as the fall of Emperor Sinek. Sinek conquered the kingdom of Babylon, but it disappeared because of an arrow from Gilgamesh. The kingdom that believed in Enlil forced the kingdom that believed in Marduk to retreat, and the majesty of the god Enlil seemed to be about to reach its zenith, but in the end because of his fall, everything became meaningless. The one who can cut him down and cut him down must be Marduk." Walter finally showed a look of understanding. "So that's how it is. It was Marduk who cut down Enlil, so will the god that Assyria and Hittite believe in change?" Chapter 259. 240 The Quest of the Creator. Walter thought for a moment before saying, "I see, Enlil will still be the main god that the kingdom believes in, even though this god has fallen. This may be ridiculous, but how long will it last?" Goliath sighed again. "I'm afraid it won't be long before the situation changes, and even if the world does not know, the Anunnaki gods will not sit idly by. If Anu, the father of the gods, really exists, he will definitely do something. But no matter what the gods do, a turbulent era has begun. I seem to see the legendary war of the gods from 1,000 years ago again, and the curtains are slowly opening again. If one day the Hittite kingdom falls into such an era again, Walter, please remember my advice and accept the guidance of Ammon. I can tell you, he is the one prophesied by the gods." There was a prophecy circulating among the gods of the continent, and only very few high priests like Goliath could read the records of those ancient books. It was said that when the plains of Duk, where the war of the gods had broken out, was restored from desolation, the god of the gods would appear from there. Ammon knew that legend, and Goliath had obviously read it as well. The plains of Duk became fertile again because of the great flood unleashed by Enlil. Enlil obviously thought that he would become the legendary god of the gods, but now he was the first of the gods to fall. Walter's expression became confused again. "Respected teacher, I understand what you are saying, but I don't understand why you are saying this." Goliath's voice sounded old and dignified, and he waved his hand and said, "One day you may understand, and when that time comes, I hope you will remember what I said today." The fall of Enlil not only caused a series of chain reactions in the mortal world, but also affected the divine realm in eternity beyond this world. Goliath said that Anu, the father of the gods of the Anunnaki divine clan, must not sit back and watch, and would definitely do something. Just as he said this, the divine realm where the Anunnaki gods lived was experiencing the second tremor since the day it was born. This divine kingdom was created by Anu, the god of heaven, in his own spiritual world, from the eternal void. If one came to this divine kingdom, one would find that the mountains and rivers here were very similar to the Assyrian plateau in the north of the heaven's pivot continent. The mountain was towering and majestic, but it was not as desolate and barren as the human world. The top of the huge mountain was also covered in pure white snow, and the glaciers hanging down from the cliff were like crystal clear and beautiful ice sculptures. On the other hand, the valley and plains were full of vitality. Flowers bloomed like a brocade, and the green grass was like a carpet. From time to time, the cheerful chirping of birds could be heard. There were also large and small pearl-like lakes dotted with flowers and plants beside the lakes, and palace-like houses were clustered around them. This was the Saya Plateau, not the plateau seen in the human world, but the ideal Saya Plateau in the soul world. On the highlands, in the valleys, and in the lakes, there were all kinds of creatures, as well as happy and leisurely people. But they were not gods. It could be said that they were angels in a sense, or mortals in another sense. They did not grow old or die, and lived in peace and happiness in the eternal divine kingdom. These creatures were also created by Anu's soul world. But these creatures did not have the vision beyond that of Anu, the god of creation. As a part of the existence of the divine kingdom, they could not leave this divine kingdom. If the god of creation left, the world created by his soul would also disappear, and then all this would disappear with the departure of Anu, as if it had never existed. This carefree and peaceful world suddenly shook at this moment, and there was a faint aura of panic and destruction that was almost impossible to appear in the divine kingdom. This was not an earthquake, but a fluctuation caused by the destruction of time and space. Not to mention the creatures created by Anu, even the real gods in the divine kingdom showed a look of horror. The source of the shaking was an invisible world in the divine kingdom, the world created by Creator Enlil, which had collapsed and disappeared. If there was anything in common between the achievements of the Creator and the God of creation, it was that the Creator could also create a world of his own in eternity. As for what this world looked like, it depended on the wishes of the Creator and the vision of the soul. But this world was closed, isolated, and could only be enjoyed by the Creator himself. For the other gods, it was equivalent to not existing. According to the oath that the gods swore when they joined the divine system, when they had the achievement of the Creator and created their own world, they must also integrate the cultivation knowledge contained in the creation of the world into the soul world of the God of creation, so that the God of creation could also gain more. The realm of the God of creation was higher than that of the Creator, that the divine kingdom he created could not only accommodate the world of the Creator, but also the gods who accepted guidance, so that everyone could have a paradise of eternal transcendence in the eternal world. Therefore, the world of the God of creation was also the world of the gods, not their own closed soul. But the God of creation did not obtain this achievement without a price. Creating a divine kingdom was equivalent to establishing a divine system, but he himself could not leave, and there was no need for him to leave again. This was his world. Just like the world in which mortals lived, everything was created by him. The world of the Creator that Enlil had integrated into the divine kingdom of Anu suddenly collapsed, and although the gods could not see it, they could feel the vibration of the destruction of time and space. The gods realized that Enlil had fallen, and they also knew by whom Enlil had fallen. The moon god Nannar and the sun god Utu of the Anunnaki divine clan shouted at the same time, "Anu, our father of the gods. Hurry up and calm the tremors of this divine kingdom, it has frightened those beautiful creatures." Another angry and sad voice shouted, "Father of the gods, it was Marduk who killed Enlil, does he want to provoke a new war of the gods? How can such behavior be tolerated?" The speaker was the legendary son of Enlil, the storm god Adado, one of the divine messengers guided by Enlil, who had become a god. Another voice sounded unhurriedly, Adado, why do you only see what happened to Enlil, but not the fate that Enlil tried to impose on others? Amon never did anything to harm Enlil, but Enlil launched a flood that destroyed his home and wiped out his people. After Amon became a god, Enlil tried to kill him. Enlil fell while trying to kill Ammonius, and when he left the divine kingdom and decided to do so, he should have been prepared to suffer the same fate. His fall did not violate the covenant of the gods. The god who spoke was the legendary father of Marduk, Ea, the god of wisdom of the Anunnaki divine clan. In fact, he was the one who guided Marduk into the divine clan back then. Adado roared, but it was not Amon who killed Enlil, it was Marduk. Marduk has cut down my guide, my father. The moon god Nannar interjected, Adado, in the Anunnaki divine clan, there is only one god who can be called the father god, and that is our father of the gods, Anu. We all know Enlil's ambition, and it was this ambition that brought him to his death. He wanted to kill Amon. Do you think that Amon should have just stood there and been killed by him? If Enlil hadn't left the divine kingdom to kill Amon, there wouldn't have been the result of Marduk killing him. Can someone who has transcended eternal life still not see through it? Ea, the god of wisdom who had just stopped Adado, said at this moment, Nannar, you know that Murin will help you, so you are inclined towards Amon. But I always feel that the god is an indescribable threat. His existence may break the covenant that has been observed by the divine clans for thousands of years and push us all into an unknown fate, but I can't see it clearly. The Anunnaki gods were arguing when something suddenly unfolded in the sky above the plateau. It looked like a golden scroll, densely written with divine characters. Looking closely, each stroke in the divine characters was composed of smaller divine characters, and looking more closely, these smaller divine characters were also of the same structure. The strokes composed of smaller divine characters seemed to be in an endless cycle. The scroll unfolded with golden light, containing the rules that created the world, with a powerful force that even the sun, moon, mountains, and rivers could not resist. The tremors in the divine kingdom, including the aura of destruction of time and space, disappeared in an instant, and peace was restored. The gods heard an old and majestic voice, the person who will provoke the war of the gods is not Amon. Enlil's actions have provoked a civil war among the divine clans. And after Marduk killed him, what will be provoked is a larger war between the divine clans. Ea, the god of wisdom, do you know how powerful the Marduk you have received is now? Marduk has long had the achievements of the Creator, but he did not open up a world of his own in the divine kingdom. Instead, he cultivated again and again in the human world. When he killed Enlil, I felt the breakthrough in power in the imprint left by the Book of Destiny. Not only has he become stronger than me, but he has now broken through the achievement of the Creator. Nanna exclaimed, how is this possible? Ea answered Anu's question. There was a tinge of sorrow and desolation in his tone. I have expected this day to come, but I did not expect that it would come in such a way. Enlil might have made the most foolish choice. Nanna, if you want to know whether Marduk has broken through the achievement of the Creator, you only need to see if he will come here to explain his actions. According to the oath of joining the divine clan, if you kill a god, you must explain to the Creator why everything happened. If he does not come, it means that he has left the divine clan. At this moment, Nanna suddenly shouted, Murin. Have you finally come to the divine kingdom from the human world? Marduk did not come, but Murin did. The place where she appeared was the corresponding location of the palace of Murin on the human world on the Assyrian plateau in the divine kingdom, where there was also a divine palace belonging to her. Murin appeared in the divine kingdom of Anunnaki, and then said to the golden book that shrouded the sky, I am here to explain to Anu about Amon. He was ambushed by Enlil on his way to the rose garden to see me. Enlil not only wanted to kill him with his own hands, but also sent his divine emissaries to monitor my movements outside the rose garden. She spoke like a mortal in the divine kingdom, but her voice naturally carried all kinds of complex information, and the gods could understand the cause and effect clearly. Anu's voice came from the sky again, if I were still here, I would very much like to see that Ammonius. The gods were stunned. Anu obviously meant that he was no longer in the divine kingdom, but how was this possible? As the creator, he could not leave the divine kingdom, or the world would disappear. If Anu was no longer here, then who was speaking? The voice coming from the sky was clearly Anu's voice, which could not be imitated or disguised, and the gods could naturally distinguish it. The words were also accompanied by a complex piece of information. What unfolded in the sky was the holy relic of the Anunnaki divine clan, the Scroll of Destiny. According to the legends of the human world, the holder of this thing could control the entire divine clan. In fact, it recorded all the spiritual imprints and cultivation insights contained in the creation of this divine kingdom by Anu. Not only that, but the Scroll of Destiny also recorded the insights of the various gods into the divine kingdom. It was a dynamic imprint that contained all the information of this divine kingdom. Before the War of the Gods, Anu had given the Scroll of Destiny to Tiamat. This was an important inheritance, which was tantamount to telling Tiamat the secrets of the creation of the divine kingdom and Anu's own cultivation achievements. Soon after that, the War of the Gods broke out. Marduk killed Tiamat and obtained the Scroll of Destiny, and Enlil also wanted this holy relic, but Marduk returned it to Anu. This was the beginning of the break between the two gods. There were two reasons why Marduk did not keep the Scroll of Destiny in his hands. First of all, his purpose was to read the secrets of the Anunnaki divine kingdom recorded in the Scroll of Destiny and understand the mysteries of cultivation in the realm of the Creator, and this purpose had been achieved. Second, he found that although he had obtained the Scroll of Destiny, he could not really control it, as Anu could take it back at any time. Marduk, without the guidance of the divine clan, comprehended the power of origin on his own and became a god who transcended eternal life. His desire to join the Anunnaki divine clan was not the same as that of other gods, which was to explore the secrets of the Creator, and even to pursue a higher realm. Understanding the secrets of cultivation did not mean that one could succeed. Later, Marduk broke through the realm of the Creator, but still continued to pursue the realm of the Creator. Anu was aware of Marduk's vow back then, and Marduk was not even willing to be a creator like Anu. He wanted to create his own divine clan and did not want to be bound by the divine kingdom, but the prerequisite for surpassing a certain realm was to witness this realm, and Marduk had been accumulating in constant cultivation. In fact, Anu also had his own purpose in creating the Scroll of Destiny. He also wanted to leave the Anunnaki divine kingdom, but he could not let the divine kingdom disappear. So he wanted to create something, the Scroll of Destiny, which contained all the knowledge and imprints of the creation of this divine kingdom, and then use his own soul to refine it, eventually hoping to use the Scroll of Destiny to replace the existence of the Creator. This was an attempt by Anu, and it was the path of cultivation that he continued to explore after becoming the Creator. When he gave the Scroll of Destiny to Tiamat, he more or less hoped that Tiamat, who controlled the Scroll of Destiny, could replace him and allow the Anunnaki divine kingdom to continue to exist after he left. But the battle of the gods disrupted this plan of Anu's. When Marduk returned the Scroll of Destiny, Anu realized what he wanted to do, and as the creator of the Anunnaki divine clan, he had a hunch that the day Marduk succeeded, the existence of the Anunnaki divine clan would be greatly threatened. Anu wanted to leave the Anunnaki divine kingdom even more and go to the mortal world to stop the disaster of Anunnaki. He had practiced the Scroll of Destiny for nearly 1,000 years, and finally he could do one thing, that was, he could use the Scroll of Destiny to replace himself, and he himself could return to the mortal world. That was to say, Anu had left the divine kingdom nearly 100 years ago, and no one knew where he went in the form of a new soul. This was a major breakthrough in his cultivation as a god of creation, but it was also a challenge. At this moment, it was Anu's voice speaking in the divine kingdom, but it was not Anu himself. He had refined the Scroll of Destiny into one with this divine kingdom, and as long as he did not fall, this divine kingdom would exist forever. The Scroll of Destiny contained all the cultivation knowledge and spiritual imprints left by Anu as a creator, and it could communicate with the gods, but it was not Anu's current thinking. None of the Anunnaki gods knew about this, and 100 years on the mortal world was very short in the divine kingdom. It was not until today when Marduk beheaded Enlil and used this as an opportunity to break through the realm of the Creator and become one with the divine kingdom that the scroll of destiny spoke, and the spiritual imprint left by Anu in it explained his whereabouts to the gods. If Aman were here, he would be very interested in this matter, because as far as he knew, there had been more than one god who had tried to pursue the realm of the Creator. To break through this realm, one had to pass a test, and even lose their eternal life. Goddess Isis failed, but Zeus of the Olympian divine clan succeeded. Anu must have understood the possible consequences of doing so, so he adopted another way to bypass the test, which was to spend 1,000 years refining the magical scroll of destiny. It seemed that he had succeeded, but it also proved that the test could not be avoided. Although Anu left the scroll of destiny and went to the mortal world, what was reborn in the mortal world was an almost blank soul. After Anu left the divine kingdom and went to the mortal world, there were only two ways for him to come back. The first was to end his life in the mortal world, the second was to start all over again and pass all the tests to become a god who transcended eternal life again. His current situation was very similar to that of Batet back then, except that he did not know what the result would be. It was possible that he had gone to the mortal world in vain and would eventually return with nothing. Chapter 260. 241, The Bible. Until today, Anu had not returned, which meant that if he had become a new living creature in the human world, he should still be alive now, nearly 100 years ago. His identity may be human or other living creatures, but he would never know that he was Anu, living in the world like other living creatures and starting over again, but deep in his soul he carried Anu's vow when he left the divine realm. What would have happened to such a deity in the human world? What kind of story would have happened to him? It could only be said that it was wonderful. Murin came to the divine realm to explain to Anu about Enlil's attempt to kill Aman but was beheaded by Marduk, but unexpectedly the voice left by Anu in the Book of Destiny replied with such words, which surprised the gods. It was not until today that they learned that Anu had left. Enlil, one of the two main gods in the Anunnaki divine realm, had fallen, and the other main god, Marduk, did not come to the divine realm to explain to Anu, indicating that he had obviously broken through the achievement of the god of creation and was freed from the oath of joining the divine clan. As for whether Marduk had become another god of creation or had broken through to a higher realm than the god of creation, the gods did not know. The current situation of the Anunnaki divine clan was equivalent to the disappearance of the god of creation, and the two main gods of the divine realm were also gone. This was something that had never happened since the birth of the divine clan, and the gods were at a loss for a moment. And Anu seemed to have expected that today's situation might happen before he left, and the voice in the Book of Destiny said again, "The life of a living creature is very short, and I may be back soon. On the day I return, Murin, I hope you can invite Aman to see me, I would like to talk to him." About 3 months after the fall of Enlil, Aman quietly came to the rose garden of Yun Namna. The dozen or so divine emissaries under Murin, except for Shubra, had now returned to this divine palace, and took the initiative to open the door to welcome Ammonius' arrival, and told him that the goddess Aman had been waiting for him. Aman's face was a little pale, just like a mortal who had fallen ill. There were also traces of weakness. As he walked towards the palace at the foot of the mountain, he saw Wendy among the flowers. When Wendy saw Aman, she stood in the garden by the stream and waved to him. She shouted cheerfully, "My God, I have been waiting for you. I will use the most beautiful flowers to welcome you." Are these flowers beautiful? They were all planted by me. Only in this kind of divine palace can such beautiful flowers be cultivated. As Aman approached, he turned around inadvertently. He had already regained his usual demeanor and appearance. There was no trace of weakness at all. He came to the flowers with a smile and said, "It's really beautiful. I've never seen such beautiful flowers, but you're even more beautiful than these flowers." Wendy blushed and said with her head lowered, "The goddess is waiting for you, and she seems to be in a hurry. Please go in quickly, I will accompany you to enjoy the flowers when I have time." Yun Namna's eyes were sharp, and Aman could not hide his weakness in front of her. The goddess tugged at his sleeve as soon as she saw him and asked, you're injured, who did it? Enrol or Marduk? Aman smiled bitterly. Of course it was Enrol. One must pay a price to lure him into the trap. How could I get away unscathed? But it's worth it. He has fallen, and my father and crazy Ol can rest in peace. As for Marduk, I have an agreement with him that no matter what identity he appears in, he cannot take the initiative to hurt me, nor can he order his divine emissaries to attack me. Murin snorted and said, do you think Marduk is being kind to you? He won't attack you himself, but he would love to borrow Enrol's hand to cut you down or severely injure you. You're lucky enough to be where you are now. Don't go anywhere during this time, and you must not leave the rose garden before you recover from your injuries. Aman smiled. Of course I won't go anywhere. Although I'm injured, I've also fulfilled my wish for many years, and I've gained something. Do you know? I even vaguely understand the path of cultivation of the Creator, and I want to practice for a while to understand those feelings clearly so that I can verify them in the future. Yun Namna looked at him, blinked her beautiful eyes, and said meaningfully, it's actually not difficult to understand the path of cultivation of the Creator. I've had some insights for many years, and I was looking for an opportunity to have a good exchange with you. What's really difficult is the process of practice and verification, which is the same as things in the human world. Sometimes you know what to do to achieve a certain achievement, but it's not easy to actually do it. Aman reached out and put his arm around her shoulder. Because I'm not a god of the Anunnaki divine clan, we rarely discuss cultivation issues together, and now we have a chance to verify each other's insights. My goddess of youth and love, what you have verified must be clearer than what I have. Yun Namna finally smiled and leaned against Aman's chest. That's not necessarily true. You were a very special person before you became a god, and now you are a very special god. The cultivation of the gods also runs through from beginning to end, and if there is still a will after transcending eternal life, you can realize that this path has long existed. The achievement of the Creator, the ability to open up a world of their own in the immortal eternity, everything comes from the spiritual imprint and the knowledge of cultivation. This foundation was laid long before becoming a god and when passing the test of endless life and death. Without this source, there is no way to talk about the achievement of the Creator out of nothing. And the way to pass the test of endless life and death is related to each person's experience, and the ups and downs you experienced on the continent. Looking back, the course of life is so ups and downs, so colorful. Many divine emissaries could not have had what you have experienced before they became gods, and the title of Mortal Emperor Killer is enough to show your uniqueness. When you and I exchange our own insights, I may even take advantage of you more. The achievements of the gods often cannot be measured by time, and if you enjoy that eternal comfort in the divine kingdom, there will be no change even after 1,000 years. And the achievement of the gods does not mean the level of magic power, but the difference in the way and rules of using power, and this is the real breakthrough. Aman listened quietly, and as Yun Namna spoke, it was naturally accompanied by information imprinted in his soul, explaining the complex and esoteric meaning. The mutual verification of information between the gods could happen at any time, and it did not mean that they had to sit down and talk to each other like a negotiation. As long as it was imprinted in the soul, it would not be forgotten, and it only depended on whether it could be truly verified in cultivation. When Yun Namna finished, Aman said softly, "Thank you for telling me this, it is exactly what I lack in experience. After all, I have just become a god not long ago, and there are many things that I am still experiencing and thinking about. When I came, I found that you had gathered all the divine emissaries under you to the rose garden, and you seemed to be very nervous. Did something happen again?" Yun Namna suddenly sighed and reached out to grab Aman's arm, like an ivy encountering a big tree that she could rely on, and said with her head down, "Something unexpected has happened, and it is related to the fate of the entire Anunnaki divine clan. Marduk has left the divine clan, and the other king god has been killed by him, and the god of creation, Anu, has left the divine kingdom and gone missing." As she spoke, she had imprinted what had happened in the divine kingdom of Anunnaki into Aman's soul, and not only did she explain everything clearly, but this information also contained instructions on how to enter the divine kingdom of Anunnaki. Although Aman was not a god of this divine clan, the voice that Anu had left in the scroll of destiny had already spoken, saying that he wanted to invite Aman to enter the divine kingdom in the future to meet him. Aman was also surprised to hear the news, and he immediately explained to Murin what he knew about Zeus and Isis, frowning and asking, could it be that Anu wants to avoid the test and break through in another way? Why do I feel like this is a detour? And Marduk broke through and became a god of creation after killing Enlil? Why do I feel like he is more than just a god of creation? As far as I know, Marduk has more than one title of god. Murin replied, Marduk enjoyed the titles of 50 gods in the sacrifices of the kingdom of Babylon, and an ordinary priest's tongue would cramp after reading them all. Aman shook his head and said, not among these 50 names, it should be the name of a god from another divine clan. There is at least one name I know, but I have to abide by the agreement not to say it. And when Moses and the others returned to the plains of Duk, they were tempted by a god who called himself Bakri, and I heard that Bakri was the name of the god worshipped by the East Baz Empire of the continent. I suspect that he is probably Marduk. Murin had a melancholy look on her face. Whether Anu took a detour or not, you can only guess, and you can't really experience his realm. But Marduk did break through and become a god of creation, and as for what kind of achievement he obtained, it will soon become clear. Now that the gods of the Anunnaki divine clan are without a leader, except for the god of wisdom, Ea, who can still keep his composure, the rest of the gods have lost their backbone. I also feel uneasy, so I summoned all the divine emissaries to the rose garden. Aman hugged her, stroked her back and said, the god of creation is the one who guides the divine clan, and even if he is not here, you have not lost the guidance to become a god, so there is no need to be at a loss. You said that the gods are without a leader, but I am more concerned about another question. After Enlil falls, what will happen to the emissaries under him? Yun Namna replied, this is also similar to the situation after the War of the Gods back then, and the situation of the emissaries under Enlil is similar to that of the 9 monsters back then. They can leave the divine clan, but they must keep their promise not to reveal the secrets of the divine clan. If there is a god who continues to guide them in place of Enlil, they can still stay in the divine clan and become an emissary under another god. At this point, Yun Namna raised her head worriedly and said, as far as I know, some of the emissaries have left the divine clan, just like the Scorpion King back then. But there is also a group of emissaries who have accepted the guidance of the god of storms, Kibir, the god of flames, and Nugus, the god of ashes, who have a grudge against you, have become the emissaries under Adado. In the Anunnaki divine clan, Adado became a god under the guidance of Enlil, and he regards Enlil as his father god. Even if he cannot afford to provoke Marduk, he will definitely come to you. Adado's combat power is quite strong, and he has gathered such a group of powerful emissaries, you must be careful. Aman sneered, Adado, the god of storms, the son of Enlil in the myths and legends. The official name of the Assyrian giant legion is called the Adado Legion, which really fulfills the name of the enemy. But I have never seen this god, and it is possible that he has not come to the mortal world since the day I was born, so it is impossible for me to provoke him. If he wants to cause trouble for me, I won't be polite. I haven't even been afraid of Enlil, so why would I be afraid of him? Yun Namna waved her fist and hit him lightly. I didn't say you should be polite, I just want you to be careful. Although Adado's combat power is not as good as Enlil's, he is stronger than you. Aman smiled slightly. I am injured now, and I will naturally not leave the rose garden before I recover. But cooperating with Marduk to slay Enlil is not without gain. I have learned more and will be stronger than before. A year passed unknowingly. A year's time was very short for the gods, and it was almost no different from a short day in the eternal divine realm. But for a god like Aman, it was a rare time in the mortal world. After he became a god, he hardly had any rest, and it was not until the fall of Enlil that he entered Yun Namna's rose garden to rest with his injuries. No mortal knew how Aman spent the year in the rose garden, and when he reappeared in front of the disciples, it was as if nothing had changed from yesterday, but the invisible aura was clearly much stronger than before, and the look in his eyes had become deeper. During the year that Aman stayed in the Rose Garden, the events of the mortal world continued to happen as countless historical events had happened before. The city of Salem ushered in its golden years since its founding, reaching unprecedented prosperity. With Usher and Titch Show, two talents in handling military and political affairs, Aesop was also a lot more relaxed. The slave-born governor now devoted more energy to his early hobbies, and began to collect the various myths and legends of the continent. Aesop did not travel far, and what he collected and sorted out was not ancient stories, but the legends about Ammonius that he had seen and heard in recent years. The people of Salem believed in Ammonius, but as a newly born god, Ammon could not compare with the ancient gods in one respect. He had not yet left behind a scripture that formed a faith faction, and these should have been organized by the believers on earth. What Aesop was now going to organize was a scripture formed by Ammonius' oracles, miracles, and hymns dedicated to him by his believers. After Moses' departure, the new leader of the Dushians, Joshua, had become an old friend of Aesop. Inspired by Aesop, he was doing the same thing, organizing the scriptures for Allah, whom the Dushians believed in. Allah's oracles, miracles, and hymns were easy to collect, and they were all related to the personal experiences of the Dushians. When Joshua compared the information he had collected with the stories of Ammonius compiled by Aesop, the two found that many of the contents overlapped, and some of the stories even overlapped. The two gods were sometimes like one god. Allah only appeared when he guided the Dushians back to their homeland, but this event itself contained the story of Ammonius. When it came to Allah's miracles, Ammon could not be avoided, whether it was Supreme General Ammon or Ammonius today. It was Ammon who took the Dushians to his territory and created an opportunity for them to leave, and it was Ammon who ordered Aesop and Link to build this city of Salem to welcome them. If Allah appeared as a god, guiding the hope and faith of the Dushians, then Ammon appeared as a mortal, creating all kinds of conditions and help for the Dushians, like two sides of a certain force. Aesop knew the inside story, but it was not convenient for him to say it, and with Joshua's cleverness, he vaguely guessed something. When the believers in the mortal world talked about the legends of the gods, they often had an unwitting habit. They unknowingly transferred all kinds of magical deeds that were circulating on the continent to the gods they believed in. Moreover, they even went through ingenious processing. By doing so, it was not only to put gold on the faces of the gods, but also to make themselves more glorious. In the eyes of the gods, doing so might be boring, but people always had this habit, consciously or unconsciously. The people of Duk enjoyed a high status in the city of Salem, and the reason was simple, because they were once the owners of this land, and Ammonius, whom the city of Salem believed in, was once a Duk miner. According to the believers' self-assertive explanation, Ammonius appeared on earth as a Duk miner to save the world. In this way, the people of Duk seemed to have become people who had been with the gods, and their status had become invisibly honorable. Their self-perception was more or less the same. Although they believed in the one and only God, Allah, and they were subconsciously proud of the fact that many others in Salem believed in Ammonius. The people settled in Salem, occupied the best land, were respected, and possessed superb skills. When they were no longer burdened with the suffering of their ancestors, their strength and wisdom became the wealth left by their ancestors, and made them the richest people in Salem. The advantages they had were naturally incomparable to those of the cavemen, the highland giants, and the wanderers from all over the continent. The girls were willing to marry the people of Duk, and now they had their own descendants. When the people told the story of the one and only God, Allah, to their children, they unknowingly made up many of the miracles that Ammon had performed. What was more interesting was that when they retold the experience of walking out of Igut, the story gradually changed. For example, the divine emissaries of the Ennead had used various means to stop them, once putting the people in a desperate situation. The truth may have damaged the glory of Allah, so in the story, there was another interpretation, the story of Allah performing miracles to punish the people of Igut. Chapter 261. Himeng should know what Aesop and Joshua were up to, and what kind of stories were circulating among the people, but this was not something he wanted to know. The angels in the Garden of Eden were also aware of these things, and they found it very interesting, especially Link, who had nothing better to do than to make up stories with Aesop when he was in Leng. Of course, there were also military and political affairs. After Lorad became the governor of Enrol, his first task was to replenish the giant legion and organize a larger logistics team. All of this was carried out using the influence of the Lorad family, and the recruitment of manpower and supplies was a task that offended many people. This was no longer the era of Emperor Sinek. If Enrol was in a position to win, there would naturally be people willing to contribute to the cause. However, the current situation of Enrol was obviously not optimistic. After the city of Leng became strong and prosperous, it adopted a strategy of Cold War. Not only did it take back the traditional mines belonging to the Dushans, but it also opened new mines along the Saya Plateau, gradually encroaching on the strategic space of Enlil City and forming a situation of outflanking it from the rear. The sphere of influence of Leng was getting closer and closer to the supply route through the Saya Plateau to Enrol. Once there was a conflict, it would be easy to cut off their reinforcements. In fact, Enrol was being watched so closely that it could not move at all. Enrol also gained land, but its production was only enough to sustain the survival of the citizens. More strategic resources still needed to be replenished from Assyria. Enrol was built as an offensive stronghold, and it could only play its role during expansion. But when the strategic situation changed, maintaining defense became a pointless consumption. Well, it would be a pity to give up, but not giving up would not bring them any benefits. Instead, they would have to suffer losses every day. Leng was not in a hurry to start a war. It only adopted a strategy of blockade and restriction, and naturally, it would be able to make Enrol last until the day it could not stand it anymore. The divine emissaries in the Garden of Eden also had the rare leisure time since they followed Amon. This year was very happy and peaceful, and there was another divine emissary, Rulio. Rulio had long wanted to enter the Garden of Eden, but it was not until Ammonius returned from the Rose Garden that he officially accepted the guidance. Rulio entered the Garden of Eden after he was freed from his status as a summoned beast. This was related to another joyous event, which was Michael Hyaming marrying Princess Cilia. How could a supreme mage, a noble princess of a kingdom, marry a man of unknown origin? Logically speaking, such a marriage would be opposed by the Hittite royal family. But Sylvia was very straightforward. She sent a letter to King Asher, the contents of which were as follows: I want to marry Michael Hemmings. He is an emissary under the guidance of Ammon. If you object, I will ask Ammonius to speak to you personally. When King Asher saw this letter, he immediately sent an emissary, not only agreeing to the marriage, but also sending a generous dowry. In his opinion, as an emissary of the gods, Sigul's status was worthy of a princess. On the other hand, Asher did not dare to let Ammonius personally come to talk to him. Ammon now had the title of Mortal Emperor Killer, and whether this was a joke or not, Asher, who had become king, would rather believe it than not, and naturally did not dare to test the miracle of this god with his own body. Once Sylvia got married, she would become Lady Sigul, but the surname Sigul represented her birth, and Sylvia was a human, not a seagull, so she gave herself the surname Ruashue. The meaning was obvious. If Michael was a seagull, then she was like the waves that held up the seagull, and her name in the Garden of Eden was Sylvia Ruashue. Link was a person who liked to follow the fashion. Born as a caveman, he naturally did not have a surname, so he claimed that his surname was Link, and then gave himself the name Uriel, calling himself Link Uriel. When Sigul married Sylvia, she made a request, and that was to undo the soul contract with Rulio, freeing the charm mermaid from her status as a summoned beast. When Rulio came to the continent to become Sylvia's summoned beast, he was willing. Otherwise, with his strength, it would have been difficult for Sylvia to subdue and sign a soul contract with him. Now that Sigul had asked Sylvia to release Rulio, Rulio was willing. After all, their circumstances were different. The first thing Rulio did when he came to the Garden of Eden was to also cultivate the pair of angel wings. When he summoned white wings in the form of a young man, it was naturally very good-looking, but when he revealed his original form as a charm mermaid with those big wings, it looked a little funny. But Rulio did not feel that he looked funny, because there was still Elmar at the bottom. Since ancient times, have you ever seen an ironback flying in the sky with its wings spread? Today, there was a mermaid flying next to it, and they all had the same wings. These two grotesque angels flew out of the Garden of Eden, flapped their wings and flew over the Euphrates River Valley, landed on the edge of the mountains and returned to their normal appearance, and happened to stop a person. It was the dark wolf god Minji of the Anunnaki divine clan. After the fall of Enlil, Minji also faced a new choice. Should she leave the divine clan or accept the guidance of another god? For the divine emissaries, of course, they hoped to continue to stay in the divine clan and receive guidance. Kibir, the god of fire, the god of gray, Nugus, and others all accepted the guidance of the god of storm, Adado, and remained the divine emissaries of the Anunnaki divine clan. On the other hand, the power that Minji trained in was very special. It was a violent power that could be transformed and controlled by a god into one's body and mind, and it must be guided in order to continue training. After the fall of Enlil, the origin of that inexplicable trap was finally found out, and it turned out to be set up by Minji back then. Minji failed to assassinate Amon twice, and was still 1 point away from success. He was beaten into a cripple and did not play any role in the important battle later on, and was despised by Adado. Minji became a divine emissary exiled by the divine clan, and who in this world could guide him? And he also heard that Adado was resentful and might punish him, so who in this world could protect him? The dark wolf god could only think of Ammonius, and other than the gods of the Anunnaki divine clan, he had only dealt with this god. Minji remembered the agreement he had with Ammon, and so he came to the city of Talon to pray to Ammonius. Because Ammon had promised that when Minji recovered to his peak state, he could come to him again for a duel, but before that, Minji was not allowed to hurt Ammon's disciples and the people of Talon. This was a chance that Ammon had given him to free himself from his mission. Minji abided by this agreement, but used this as an opportunity to summon Ammon and request to give up the duel, hoping to receive Ammon's guidance. He had fought with Ammon before and knew that Ammon also mastered that violent power, and now that Ammon had become a god, it meant that Ammon understood the path to ultimate transcendence through the cultivation of this power, and the only person who could guide him was probably Ammonius. Ammon happened to leave the rose garden and return to the Garden of Eden, and heard Minji's prayer, so he sent 2 disciples to see him. After seeing Minji, Elmar tilted his head and looked at him for a long time, then said angrily, "You are that dark wolf god, known as the #1 assassin on the continent? It was because of you that I drilled in the charcoal marsh for more than half a month, but unfortunately I couldn't find you. Since you have assassinated Ammonius before, you still have the face to ask for his guidance today." Rulio also shouted from the side, "Back then, I was also sent to guard the trade route of the charcoal marsh, just to guard against people like you causing trouble. I worked hard for more than half a year." Minji hurriedly bowed and apologized. "What I did back then has caused trouble for the 2 of you. I am willing to make up for it with my future actions. Today I came to ask for Ammonius' forgiveness, and swear to accept his guidance, and become Ammonius' oracle like the 2 of you. There is one thing you don't know, I am not only an oracle guided by Enlil, but I also signed a soul contract with him like a summoned beast. Assassinating Ammonius was Enlil's order, not my original intention." Upon hearing this, Rulio showed some sympathy, but Elmar still scolded with a straight face, "This does not absolve you of your guilt. You did it, so you have to bear the consequences. You cannot be absolved of your responsibility just because someone instructed you. It is understandable that you had no choice, but it does not mean that it did not happen. Ammonius asked us to ask you, why did you make such a request?" Minji Yuyi replied, "What I practice is a violent power, like a beast lurking in my body and mind that will explode at any time, and now only Ammonius can guide me. As far as I know, only he can truly master the mystery of this power." Elmar sneered, "Only Ammonius can guide the power you practice, but that is your own business, it has nothing to do with Ammonius. Ammonius can also guide others, why you?" Rulio asked in a low voice, "Minji Yuyi, Ammonius also asked us to ask you another question. If he refuses, what are you going to do?" Minji Yuyi could not hide the disappointment and regret in her eyes, and she prostrated in the direction of the Euphrates River Valley. Ammonius. Even if you refuse my request, I still want to ask for your forgiveness. I also have one more thing to tell you this time. God Kibir and Nugas have both accepted Adado's guidance. I know them, because they have hurt you before, so they are even more afraid of your existence, and are tempting Adado to continue to be your enemy. At this moment, Amon's figure suddenly appeared and said, "Thank you for bringing me this news and kind reminder, although I already know. If you want to ask for my forgiveness, then do one thing for me, come with me." Seeing Ammonius appear in person, El-Mar and Rulio both retreated to the side, and Amon ordered the two divine emissaries to return to the Garden of Eden, while he left with Minji Yuyi. Amon did not intend to meet the Dark Wolf God, but because of another matter, he changed his mind at the last minute and decided to take Minji Yuyi to meet another person. Cain, the supreme mage of the Kingdom of Babylon, did not expect that Sinak would be assassinated. Fortunately, although he had been bribed by the Assyrian Empire in an attempt to frame Prince Benut for Gakate's assassination of Princess Sisela, this matter was not exposed in the end. After Prince Benut succeeded to the throne, not only was Gakate not punished, but he also became one of the 3 high priests of the kingdom. On the surface, Cain had always supported Benut, and Gakate had also recommended Cain to King Benut I. Now was a time of need, and a supreme mage like Cain, who was born among the common people, did not have a complicated background, so he should be promoted by the new king. Benut I approved all of Gakate's other recommendations, but he did not express his opinion on the recommendation of promoting Cain. Cain waited for a long time for the opportunity to meet with Benut I alone. Benut I praised him verbally for his achievements and said many words of praise and encouragement. Finally, he asked him to carry out a task, and if he completed it well, he would naturally receive the reward he deserved. Reward. This task was similar to the one that Amon had accepted in the Temple of Isis, which was to visit the plains of Duk, but in a different way. Simply put, Benut I was going to send a delegation of emissaries to the cities of Budamia and Meso on the borders of the Hittite kingdom, accompanied by representatives of various trading companies in Hittite. This was naturally also an activity to promote trade, and to examine the various opportunities for cooperation between the two countries was very symbolic in terms of diplomacy. The last stop of the delegation was also the city of Talang, which was their real destination. Now, the tables had turned, and the area around Talang had become the most important producer of refined iron and parangons on the continent. It also had the best craftsmen on the continent, and many of the products were currently needed by the Hittite kingdom. The delegation was led by a diplomat, and Cain was the priest who followed the delegation. His position was very noble and special, and he was responsible for supervising the activities of all the members of the delegation. Benut I also gave him another task, which was to inspect the customs of the plains of Duk and the development of the various cities. Important information about the development of each city was recorded with divine spells. At the thought that Talang was Ammonius' territory, a secret that had been hidden in Cain's heart for many years was touched. He instinctively did not want to go, but Benut I had given the order, and he had to accept the task. Along the way, Cain's delegation was received very politely, and even when they reached Talang, nothing unusual happened. What he was worried about did not happen. After the visit and the completion of the task, the delegation left Talang, and Cain finally breathed a sigh of relief. When they left the plains of Duk, crossed the Euphrates River and returned to the Kingdom of Babylon, Cain was finally completely relieved. It seemed that Ammonius' friends had either forgotten about him, or they did not pay attention to him at all. After crossing the Euphrates River, it was still 3 days' journey to the main city of Kish. The next night, the delegation rested in the town of Akkad, where Ammon and Medanzo had been. As a high priest of the kingdom and a supreme mage, Cain naturally stayed in the best room of the shrine in the town. That night, Cain still persisted in his daily meditation and training as usual. There seemed to be a power in his blood that was ready to stir. This was a power that he had discovered and mastered on his own after Ammon had left. Although Ammon did not continue to teach him the power of two sides, Cain also guessed the truth when he heard that Ammon was a god. In fact, Ammon was a mortal who had become a god through practice, and not a god who had come to the human world as people had said. He had also been taught by Ammon in the past, so the path he was exploring might also lead to the realm of immortality. Immortality had become Cain's vow. As soon as he felt the power surging in his blood, as if it contained some kind of thirst, he suddenly heard a voice in his soul, "Cain, do you still remember me?" This voice was unforgettable for Cain. The speaker was the sorcerer he and Abel had helped in the farm, and also the savior of the two brothers and all the people on the boat on the Euphrates River, Ammon. Ammon taught them the power of two sides and left after they had awakened it. Later, the two brothers were appointed by the city of Uruk as mages, and they also joined Gilgamesh's guards. The guards trained by Gilgamesh were all ordinary nobles who had declined, and all of them were advanced mages. Gilgamesh taught them to practice low-level body arts like warriors, so that they could become knights who could carry weapons and charge. They were a formidable force on the battlefield. Since Cain and Abel practiced the power of two sides, after becoming advanced mages, they naturally also had the achievements of advanced body arts. They did not reveal this secret, but they performed extremely well in the guards and were praised and valued by Gilgamesh. At the same time, they also became priests of the Uruk shrine. In the Battle of Kenmut, the Igut army led by Ammon had a fierce battle with the Uruk legion led by Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh's guards charged at Ammon's personal guards. After a round of battle, the cavalry regrouped. Cain was safe and sound, but Abel was lying in a pool of blood. Before the battle, the two brothers had an argument because they knew that the commander of the other side was their savior, Ammon. They had a secret, the secret of practicing the power of two sides. In a chaotic battle of 10,000 people, the fall of one person might not be noticeable, and it was even difficult to tell whose sword or spear Abel was killed by in the chaos. But Ammon noticed the two brothers at the time, and later carefully observed the scene in the battlefield information recorded by the priests. The scene was very chaotic, and he could not see clearly. When Ammon became a god, everything that he had experienced in this life was so clear that he could even observe everyone he knew and everything he had experienced, like a replay. This was the difference between gods and mortals. Ammon finally confirmed one thing: Abel was secretly ambushed by his brother when he was charging, and that was the main reason why he died. At that time, almost no one on the battlefield could see clearly. Chapter 262. 243, Lotus of the Beginning. Among the successors that Ammon had taught in his early years, Abel was one of his favorites, and if there was a chance in the future, Ammon would not mind guiding him to become a divine emissary in the Garden of Eden, but Abel was no longer so lucky, and Ammon felt it was a pity. When Ammon learned about the truth of Abel's death, he had not had the time to pay attention to it, and now that Cain had come to the city of Salem with the diplomatic mission, Ammon, who had planned to go to the divine kingdom of Eru, suddenly changed his mind and went to deal with this matter first. Ammon did not show up in the plains of Duk, but waited until Cain returned to the territory of Babylon and stayed in the town of Arcade for the night before he spoke. Cain opened his eyes, jumped out of bed, and knelt on the ground and replied in fear and trepidation, "Is it you? My benefactor, my teacher, the God who guides me. I have been looking forward to your appearance day and night." Ammon's voice replied coldly, "Looking forward to my appearance day and night? When you said this, I could almost see black smoke coming out of your soul. You clearly entered the city of Salem, but you did not even dare to enter my shrine, and you never prayed to me. I came here today just to ask, where is your brother?" Cain was still hoping for a fluke, and replied in a sad tone, "He is dead, killed in the battle between the Uruk legion and your army. But neither he who is dead nor I who is still alive dared to blame you. I just feel remorseful that I did not fulfill my promise to my father and could not protect him all the time." Ammon's voice also became sad, "Cain, I once saved you and taught you the power of two sides, and now when I see you again, you even seal your soul when you speak, not wanting me to peek into your true thoughts. You already have a high level of achievement, and yet you were able to do this in front of me. I saw Abel's blood flowing on the earth, as if it was mourning to me. I already know everything that happened on the battlefield, and if he did die to the enemy's swords and spears, I would feel sorry, but I could not say much. But the attack below his ribs was clearly the power I taught him, and it was executed by his brother. I have my responsibilities, but why did you become so cruel and heartless? The color drained from Cain's face at once. He raised his head and shouted, God, it's not like this. He was defending himself loudly, seemingly still kneeling on the ground and speaking to the gods, but what he left behind was an illusory message. He himself had already turned into a dark bloody light and escaped through the window, disappearing into the night at an extremely fast speed. A beam of golden light sprinkled onto the outskirts of town of Arcade. Cain, whose body had merged with the darkness, suddenly felt a scorching pain. He rolled on the ground and disappeared into the mud. He ran very fast, but Amon's golden light had already left a mark on his soul. A voice echoed in his mind, I don't know what kind of power you have cultivated, but you can actually find the source of my guidance and become one with the darkness. I will give you a punishment. You will live in darkness forever, and the light of the sun will turn you into ashes. Even in that endless night, you will face endless pursuit. In the sky, Ming Yuyi stood beside Amon and frowned. He ran really fast, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Even I, who is known as the Dark Wolf God, have lost his breath at this moment. It was as if he had melted into the darkness. What kind of divine art is this? I have never seen it before. Did you teach him? Amon also looked very surprised. He shook his head and said, I did give him pointers back then, but I have never seen the power he cultivates now. The right path in this world may lead to the same immortality, but no one knows where the wrong path leads. It seems that after he heard that I had become a god, he also yearned for immortality, but I wonder what path he had explored. Ming Yi asked, God, did you call me here to assassinate this man? Amon nodded. I also abide by the agreement between the gods, and do not want to directly attack a mortal. Since you are the best assassin on the continent, then I will leave this man to you. This is the battle between the bright night and the dark night. I will continue to guide you on how to control and use that violent power. It can even become a kind of inheritance, and your successor will forever pursue that so-called dark immortality. This is the task I have given you, and if you have done it, come back to me. Ming Yuyi saluted Amon on the clouds and jumped into the dark wilderness, like an agile beast to track the traces of Cain, and soon disappeared into the night. Amon sighed softly, and his whole body emitted a faint golden light as he stepped into the immortality. The disposal of Cain was just a small interlude. The main purpose of Amon's departure from the Garden of Eden this time was to visit the Ennead of Ra. Before he became a god, he had cut down the statues of Seth in the main temples of more than a dozen cities in Igut. Although Seth is still the Lord God of the Ennead pantheon's human god realm, his position in the hearts of the people has collapsed. Everything could change with the passage of time, and one day history would be forgotten, and as long as Seth still stood on the altar, myths and legends could even be tampered with. But Amon did not want to give him this chance to breathe. When Amon had just become a god, Seth and Enlil were waiting at the mouth of the Nile River in an attempt to cut him down. Now that Enlil had fallen, how could Amon let Seth go? He was not afraid of him when he had not become a god, and now that he had become a god who had transcended eternal life and was much stronger than before, it was even less possible for him to be afraid of him. But if he wanted to find Seth, he had to go to the divine kingdom of the Ennead. In addition to revenge, Amon wanted to see another legendary god of creation, Ra. He already knew what kind of oracle Ra had sent, ordering the emissaries of the Ennead not to bother with Amon anymore, and to let Seth solve the matter himself. This made Amon very curious and wanted to thank him in person. It was not difficult to go to the divine kingdom of Ra. The most important magic that Amon practiced was the secret of the Temple of Isis, and it was by relying on the Guardian of Isis that he successfully passed the final test. The god's tear, which had been refined by the previous saintesses, had strangely fused with his body and mind. As long as he activated the vow contained in the golden light and wanted to go there, he would naturally receive a kind of guidance. Amon stepped into the eternity of immortality, waved his hand in the empty void, and the golden light that shrouded his body scattered, forming a golden belt of light that seemed to lead to an unknown infinity, and the end of the light belt seemed to be right in front of him. It was like a golden river that kept flowing from the past to the future, and Amon stood still in the present, welcoming the arrival of the source. A huge lotus of the beginning appeared in the void, like two hands opened together, holding a red sun in the heart of the flower, and the golden river gushed out from the heart of the flower under the sun. Amon suddenly saw the appearance of the lotus and the red sun in the empty space, and the scene in his soul was no different from what he saw in his body and mind at this moment. The golden light that shrouded his body seemed to be guided, and the red sun in the extreme distance suddenly became extremely close, swallowing Amon. His body was swallowed by the red sun, but it did not feel hot. There was a sudden darkness before his eyes, and then there was light again, and he actually appeared in a familiar world of mountains and rivers. The scene here was very similar to the upper reaches of the Nile River in the northern part of the Empire of Igut. The Nile River meandered through the mountains, forming waterfalls, and finally flowed into the plains and valleys, where what should have been a desert became a beautiful grassland. The place where Amon appeared was above the sixth waterfall of the river, where palaces were distributed along the valleys on both sides of the river, very similar to the layout of the Eru in the human world, but the spatial distance was much greater. It seemed that this was the scene of daytime in the human world. The light was soft and not dazzling, as if wrapping everything without leaving a trace of shadow, but when he looked up, he could not see the sun, but a starry sky. As soon as he appeared in the Eru divine kingdom, he heard an angry and frightened voice coming from a palace below. Amon, this is Amon, how can he appear in the Eru divine kingdom? The voices of several gods came from different palaces. Since he can come, he can come. Seth still shouted, but he did not join the Eru divine clan. He is not a god in this divine kingdom. Another mocking voice said, Amon did not believe in you, the archangel, but he still entered the shrine and cut down your statue. The divine kingdom cannot stop the arrival of gods outside the divine clan, as long as he can understand the belief of this divine clan in the human world. Amon is a guest of Ra, he does not need your invitation. When Amon heard Seth's voice, his anger rose and he was about to pounce on him to force him to show himself, but the words of the gods suddenly faded away. The mountains and rivers of this divine kingdom began to move, and Amon seemed to become the only static existence in this world. The shift of heaven and earth brought him to the source of the river in an instant, and when everything was still again, Amon saw a huge lotus flower. This lotus was almost exactly the same as the lotus of the absolute beginning he saw in the eternal world. The Nile River in the divine kingdom flowed out from the center of the flower. At the heart of the flower, where the red sun was originally, sat a man who nodded to him and smiled. I am Ra, the creator of the Ennead divine clan. Amon, I have been waiting for you, and you have finally come. Amon stood in the void above the river, face to face with Ra, who was sitting in the heart of the flower. It seemed that he could take a step towards her, but this short distance seemed infinitely far in his soul, as if he could never reach the petal. There was an invisible vortex of chaos outside this lotus flower, which was the reason why Amon felt unable to approach it. Amon bowed to Ra and said, Respected Creator, I did not expect you to look so young. Ra, who was sitting in the heart of the flower, turned out to be a teenager of only 15 or 16 years old. He was very handsome, and his skin was slightly brown. Amon even had a sense of déjà vu. He wore a high crown on his head, and the top of the crown was decorated with a sun. Outside his figure was the invisible vortex of chaos, as if it was impossible to distinguish between light and darkness. Even with the detection magic of the gods, they could not perceive anything, and could only see the god through the unknown. Hearing Amon's words, Ra smiled. Do you feel curious or surprised? I am afraid that Anu and I are the earliest gods born on the continent, and we each founded the oldest divine clans. What you see of me is the state of mind of the gods. He raised his hand again and pointed to the divine kingdom on both sides of the river, opening up the world of the soul in the immortal eternity, unfolding the mountains and rivers of time and space from nothing, just like a person going from childhood to adulthood, opening his eyes to see the world, learning, perceiving, comprehending, and creating everything. If you had come 2,000 years earlier, you would have seen me as a child, with eyes full of curiosity, as if all the unknowns were possible. Aman nodded and said, "So that's how it is. You just said that you have been waiting for me, is there anything else?" "I am here for Seth, and you should know my purpose." Ra said calmly, "Without my permission, no god can fight in my divine kingdom, but Seth has caused these things himself, and he should be allowed to bear the consequences himself. I will give you a chance to deal with him alone, but don't forget one thing, if you want to cut him down, you must be prepared to be cut down yourself." Aman replied, "I was prepared for this long before I became a god, but I am afraid that Seth will not bear the price." Ra nodded and said, "Yes, I know Seth. You would rather risk being cut down to cut him down, but he does not want to lose his eternal life because of you, and he is not willing to take the risk even if there is a glimmer of possibility. I know his wish, he wants to be another god of creation, but this wish is impossible to achieve. Your coming here is the consequence of what he has done, and if you can't even face this, how can you pursue a higher realm? If you want me to agree to you duel with him in my divine kingdom, there must be a condition, and that is, you must have the achievement of the Creator. Otherwise, if he escapes from the divine kingdom, it will be difficult for you to find him. But if you have the achievement of the Creator, no matter where he is, I can guide you to him in an instant. After all, I am the creator of this divine clan, and I have guided all the gods in the divine clan, so I can still do this." Aman was stunned. "Why do you make such a condition?" "Ra, you came to my divine kingdom and tried to cut down one of my gods, shouldn't you work hard and pay the price? I have sent down a divine decree so that all the divine emissaries on earth will no longer make things difficult for you, and if you duel with Seth somewhere else outside the divine kingdom, it will have nothing to do with me." Aman explained, "I don't think you are making things difficult for me, on the contrary, I think you are even helping me, and I want to express my gratitude. I just find it a little strange, why do you want me to become the creator?" Ra laughed again. "What Seth has done has caused harm to the Ennead, and although I can't leave here, I also know what has happened on Earth, and the stories about you that have been circulating. You have become a god and have eternal time, and as long as you have a vow, you can wait for that day. You are not even afraid of being cut down, are you afraid of pursuing a higher realm?" Aman shook his head and said, "Forgive me, but I still don't quite understand, why do you want me to pursue a higher realm?" Ra said unhurriedly, "It is because I understand your experience that I am very curious and concerned about you. Perhaps you are the one I am waiting for, and the one Anu is waiting for. When you stand in front of me as a god, I am even more convinced of this. As far as I know, you have not joined the Anunnaki, but Anu will want to talk to you just as much as I do. Haven't you seen him?" For the first time since becoming a god, Aman felt confused, and he asked in puzzlement, "Respected god of creation, don't you know that Anu has left the divine kingdom?" This time it was Ra's turn to show a look of shock, and he actually stood up from the lotus. The invisible chaos surrounding the lotus disappeared, and Aman only saw a blur before his eyes, and suddenly he was standing beside Ra. It turned out that the lotus had unfolded inexplicably, and a petal stretched out at his feet, guiding him to it. Ra made a gesture, inviting Aman to sit on the petal, and said in a pleading tone, "Please sit down and talk, how could Anu leave the divine kingdom? I ask you to tell me everything you know." Aman told Ra everything he knew about Anu, all of which was relayed by Murin. The communication between the gods was naturally magical, and Ra seemed to have personally experienced what happened in the divine kingdom of Anunnaki. He sat on the lotus and fell into contemplation. Aman asked curiously, "You are the same ancient god of creation as Anu, how could you not know anything about him?" Ra looked up from his contemplation and sighed, "Even the gods of Anunnaki don't know anything about him, so how could I know? I can't leave the divine kingdom of Eru, and naturally it's impossible for me to visit him in the divine kingdom of Anunnaki. I am in the divine kingdom and can also understand everything that happens on earth, through the eyes of the statues and the prayers of the people to me, as well as the spiritual imprints of the gods that are integrated into the divine kingdom. Your story is spread among the mortals and the gods, of course I know, but it is impossible for anyone to mention the matter of Anu. After saying this, Ra looked at the unknown void and muttered to himself, as the oldest god of creation on the continent, Anu is one step ahead of me. He actually used this method, which may be another attempt to avoid the test. This may be a detour, but he won't understand unless he tries it. As he spoke, Ra raised a hand and stretched out a finger. There was a look of surprise in Amon's eyes as he saw a palm-sized lotus flower appear out of thin air above Ra's fingertips, exactly the same as the one he was sitting on, and it was still rotating slowly in the void, with a small red sun in the center of the flower. Chapter 263. The lotus flew into the space between Amon's eyebrows and disappeared. Amon was stunned and couldn't think for a moment. Even as a god with such a powerful soul, he had to use all his strength to barely absorb and integrate the huge and almost unimaginable information. He couldn't even move for a period of time. Looking at the small lotus above Ani's fingertip, it was still slowly rotating, as if it had never flown out at all, and the scene just now was like an illusion. He looked at the lotus and continued, "You must have heard the myths and legends of the human world, the poems recorded by the wandering poets. It is said that the goddess Isis defeated me and made me say her name and the real language. Now, I will tell you the so-called name and the real language." The phantom of the lotus that flew into Amon's brow and disappeared was a kind of record, and it was of the same nature as the content recorded in the scroll of destiny created by Anu. It contained all the spiritual imprints and cultivation knowledge of Anu's creation of this divine kingdom so far. Many of the contents and insights were far beyond Amon's current realm, and he couldn't verify it in a short time. But this piece of information was left in his soul, and he could gradually refer to it in the future. Ani continued unhurriedly, "The legends of the human world are very interesting. People interpret the myths in a way that they can understand. In fact, Isis also experienced what you are experiencing now. I told her all the information about the divine kingdom and my cultivation secrets." Anu gave the scroll of destiny to Tiamat. "Maybe it was for the same purpose as me. I also hoped that someone could replace me to maintain the existence of this divine kingdom." After Isis got all this, she made a vow to achieve something beyond the god of creation, but she failed. 1,000 years of cultivation was abandoned, and her eternal life was gone. But this path can be successful, because Zeus of Olympus has confirmed it. Unfortunately, it is too difficult, even more difficult than a mortal becoming a god. I haven't fully understood how to do it. Amon finally recovered and looked at the rotating lotus on Ani's fingertip and asked, "Did you also make something like the scroll of destiny?" Angela also looked at the lotus and nodded, "Yes, its name is the primordial lotus leaf." Amon asked again, "When did you make it?" Angela smiled, "Just now. The information you brought me was able to understand Anu's intention in making the scroll of destiny." "Thank you, Amon." Anu took nearly 1,000 years to create the scroll of destiny, but Angela only took a snap of his fingers to create the lotus of absolute beginning. This did not mean that one of them was more brilliant than the other. Anu were both the oldest gods of creation, and his comprehension of cultivation had long been sufficient. He had been thinking about the same problem as Anu. When he heard the news brought by Amon, his 1,000 years of cultivation solidified in an instant, and he immediately took out the lotus of the absolute beginning. Compared to an ancient god like Angela, Amon was like a newborn baby. Everything in front of him symbolized the exploration of the unknown. Today, his questions came one after another, and he couldn't help but ask, "Why do you and a god of creation like Anu have the same idea without prior consultation?" Angela looked up from the lotus and asked, "I know you must have a lot of questions. Can I ask you some questions first?" "You don't have to answer, just think about it. First of all, what is the ultimate pursuit of an emperor or a hero in the world? If all wishes can be achieved, what will it be like?" This is a very interesting question. When a person comes to the world, from the most instinctive desire, he wants to eat, to live, to reproduce, but after thinking about it in a civilized society, all of this will change. For example, an emperor like Sinak will want to conquer the world. Then what is the end of conquering the world? It is to own the whole world. The end of the desire is, everything in the world belongs to you. This is a goal that no one can achieve, not even the gods. But the God of creation can do it in another way, which is to create a world out of nothing. This world is not an illusion, it is eternal reality. In a sense, this was the case for the gods to achieve transcendence over mortals. In this way, it is not unreasonable for Seth to guide Merneptah to change the religion of monotheism, to worship the God of creation, Enlil, as the one God, and to call the other gods angels. Enlil told Aman not to answer, and sure enough, without waiting for him to answer, he continued, "If you have thought about this question, you will understand that the God of creation has achieved the end of his desire, and will not have any dissatisfaction with the situation, nor will he want to leave the divine kingdom because of dissatisfaction. He already has the world, what else does he want?" But do you know how the God of creation achieved his achievements? The lotus imprinted in your soul has already told you the secrets of cultivation. The main difference between the God of creation and the God of creation is a wish and a promise. The wish is to create this world, and the promise is to guide the gods to enjoy the eternal divine kingdom. Therefore, the God of creation could not leave and let the world disappear. This was the responsibility of the God of creation to fulfill his wish. I know that Seth also wants to prove the realm of the God of creation, but he is not willing to face the consequences of his actions, so it is impossible for him to achieve the realm of the God of creation. Based on your experience, you are the most promising God I know of to achieve such a breakthrough. For me and Anu, it's not because we're dissatisfied with the divine kingdom, but because we want to pursue another kind of transcendence. We want to know what kind of existence that is. Hearing this, Aman asked thoughtfully, "But why did you tell me your cultivation knowledge and soul imprint?" Enlil did not answer the question, "For a god like me who has achieved the achievement of the God of creation, I already have the whole world. But in a sense, the world is just that lotus flower or that scroll. Anu and I both want to transcend beyond the lotus flower and the scroll, just like how mortals become gods, to achieve greater transcendence." Aman nodded and said, "Yes, I understand what you think, but what does this have to do with me?" Enlil smiled again and said, "Supreme General Aman, don't forget the titles you received in the mortal world, blessed by the great god Horus, guard the Igut, guard the dignity of the empire, inherit the glory of Enlil, and be praised by the kingdoms. One of the titles is to inherit the glory of Enlil. After the fall of Isis, I have been waiting for a person, or more precisely, waiting for a god like you. You are a rare genius in the world like Marduk, and the most precious thing is not only your talent, but also your experience that other gods do not have. Since what he can do, you can also do, and more importantly, you are not the same person as him. So I want to ask for your help. Not now, but in the future. When asking a person to do something for you, you also have to give something. So I am also willing to help you and tell you everything I know. It doesn't matter whether you refuse my request or not, I just did what I should do today." This God of creation was quite interesting. He had something to ask of Aman, and regardless of whether Aman refused his request, he first gave Aman the greatest help a God of creation could give. Aman had to stand up on the pedal and salute, "Respected God of creation, what exactly do you want my help with?" Enlil replied unhurriedly, "I have two things I want you to agree to. The first thing happens before the second thing, but the second thing is a prerequisite for you to agree to the first thing, otherwise I don't think you will agree, so I have to make it clear in advance. According to the request I just made, you will kill Seth after you have the achievement of the Creator. At that time, do you wish to join the Ennead and become the main god of the divine realm?" The words of the God of creation were accompanied by a message, making two requests to Aman. The first request was that if Aman became the creator one day and killed Seth, Enlil hoped that he would join the Ennead and become the main god of the divine realm. It was no wonder that Enlil would make such a request, because Aman himself had said something similar. That was after Gabriel was defeated in a duel by a secret order from the Empire of Iga to hunt down Ammon. Ammon wrote a letter to Roderick and sent an envoy to the Cape States, asking the governor to send someone to deliver it to the pharaohs of Iga. In the letter, he said, "If I want to redeem the supreme warrior Gabriel, my condition is Enyila's position as the main god of the empire." The second request was that if one day in the future, like Isis, Enyila fell or had to leave the divine kingdom for some reason, he hoped that Ammon could replace him as the creator and maintain the existence of the Ennead. This was not something that could be done easily. At that time, Ammon must at least have the achievement of the creator and be able to integrate the divine kingdom into the world created by his own soul. This situation also meant that Enyila wanted to give the Ennead and the divine kingdom to Ammon. Of course, Enyila's purpose was not to give up, but to free himself from a kind of bondage. He wanted to pursue a higher realm of transcendence. If he could not pass the test, he would fall, but he also had to fulfill his promise to the gods and could not let the Ennead disappear, so he could never make a vow and really take that step. This second request would only be effective if Ammon had at least the realm of the creator and Enyila had fallen. If that time really came, Ammon would become Enyila in a sense, or his soul would be integrated with Enyila's former existence, because he had already mastered the spiritual imprint and cultivation knowledge of Enyila's creation of the divine kingdom. The title of Inheriting the Glory of Enyila would be worthy of the name, and Ammon would inherit the legendary name and true language of Enyila. Hearing Enyila's request, Ammon was also thinking about a question. When he was still immortal, what did he think of the gods? The gods he hated the most were of course Seth and Enlil, the gods closest to him should be Artemis and Murin, the god he despised the most was Horus, and the most powerful god he had ever seen was Marduk. And the one he really admired from the bottom of his heart was Isis, who had fallen long ago. From a mortal's point of view, Enyila's request was very much like making arrangements for his funeral. If Ammon had achieved the achievements of the creator, and Enyila had fallen or disappeared, he might not be unwilling to inherit the divine kingdom. But Ammon was not in a hurry to agree or refuse, and after a moment of contemplation said, "Please let me think about it again, and I will give you an answer after I kill Seth, okay?" Enyila seemed to have expected such an answer, and said with a smile, "It's useless for you to give me an answer now, of course you have to wait until then." "Ammon, can I ask you one more thing? Before you became a god, did you ever think about what you would do after becoming a god?" In front of the creator, Ammon narrowed his eyes and thought about this question. Long before he became a god. When he walked in the Saya desert to pass the test of endless life and death, he made a vow, "If there comes a day when I will pass the test of fate, the judgment of the end of the world, my wish is not to join or establish such a divine clan, nor to become such a god. I want to build a home in my belief, which can guide all who yearn for it, and not be guided by gods. The so-called gods are no longer gods, but gods in people's belief. People can choose a heavenly home in their life, or endure the torment of hell in their hearts. This is my wish to become a god, and the path under my feet will eventually lead to that place." In this way, he was destined to be different from other gods. If he wanted to fulfill his vow, he must at least have the achievements of the creator, and must surpass the achievements of the creator. In other words, he could agree to Enyila's request, because in his vow, the path of cultivation would surpass and accommodate these. In addition to this vow, Ammon also vowed to do some things, including killing Seth, punishing Enlil, helping Murin, searching for Maria, tearing down the underworld of Kela, and so on. There were really a lot of things. Enyila still did not wait for Ammon to answer, and said meaningfully, "Some things you have probably done, and some things you still need to work on, and some things you can do but haven't done yet, so do it, this is also a kind of proof." After saying this, the creator waved his hand and disappeared in front of Ammon's eyes. Ammon once again appeared in the everlasting. In that place that was both near and far, there was still a golden river. At the end of the river was still that huge lotus flower and the red sun in the middle of the flower. Ammon bowed to the divine kingdom of Eru, then turned and stepped out of the eternal immortality, once again descending to the mortal world. And Yila's last words reminded him of one thing: he had once vowed that one day he would tear down the underworld of the Anunnaki divine clan. Now the creator of the Anunnaki divine clan, Anu, was nowhere to be found, and one of the main gods, Enlil, had fallen, and another main god, Marduk, had left Shinsan and was in a state of chaos. If Amon wanted to tear down the underworld, it was the best time to fulfill his wish, so he had to fulfill it first. When Yun Namna saw Amon return in the rose garden and heard about his experience in the divine kingdom of Eru, she was naturally surprised and delighted, but when she learned that he had threatened to tear down the underworld of Kela, she said worriedly, "And Yila told you to settle the score with Seth after you have achieved the creator's level. This was actually my suggestion, but I know what you are thinking, so it is not appropriate for me to say it out loud. Now, I am more or less relieved." "But you want to tear down the underworld of Kela, do you know what that means?" Amon nodded and said, "Of course I know what that means. It may make the Anunnaki gods take a stand, and I also want to know who will come forward to help Kela against me. I have my own reasons for wanting to tear down the underworld of Kela, and you should be very clear about the beginning and end of the feud, and I am not doing it simply for revenge, but also because such an underworld should not exist in this world." Yun Namna frowned and said, "Kela is not very popular among the Anunnaki gods, but if you help her against you, Adado will definitely make a move. He was just worried about not having a chance to settle the score with you." Amon sneered and said, "That's just right, I am going to let the news out in advance, so let Kela wait for me. The Anunnaki gods will definitely hear of this news, and if there is anyone who will go against me, then come forward now, so that I don't have to worry about it every day." Yun Namna looked at him, blinked and said, "So you want to see the stance of the Anunnaki gods through this matter, and distinguish who is your enemy, so you want to spread the news before attacking the underworld?" Amon then nodded and said, "Yes, as a mortal, I never offended Enlil, but what did Enlil do to me? I have never even dealt with Adado, but Adado must deal with me. I don't even know which gods will trip me up at unexpected times, so it's better to make my stand clear now." Yun Namna said worriedly, "Why do I have a feeling that the battle of the gods is about to start again?" Amon stroked her soft waist with his hand and said, "My goddess, don't you understand yet? From the moment Enlil tried to cut me down, but was cut down by Marduk, the battle of the gods has already begun. Although I did not experience the battle of the gods 1,000 years ago, I have a hunch that this time the battle of the gods will be much larger than that time, and it will even become a dispute between the various divine clans. Not only will there be gods who will fall, but even divine clans will disappear, which I am afraid is unimaginable for many gods." Yun Namna's voice trembled a little. "Enlil has fallen, which other god will fall?" You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.